seen a blind man cross the road, trying to make the other side, baby? Ever seen a young girl growing old, trying to make herself a bride? So what becomes of you, my love?
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Pray that he's still out there, somewhere.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today on Eating While Honey and Locusts. It's always a pleasure to be with you Tuesday by Tuesday. Thank you for your faithfulness and always just being here and the communication during the week. You know, we've got a very detailed presentation today. We're into the fourth part of our series, The Foundations of Our Faith. And that's proved really popular, some astounding research from Jon Hallam with the depth that he goes into. So much so that when the series is completed, we will put it into a book form for the Eating While Honey and Locust collection, library collection that we have here in the studies, which complements everything that we do with Dr. Pidgeon and Sefer Publishing and the work and the research that they do. In fact, last week, I think probably that would have been one of Dr. P's favorites because there was some astounding research that actually solidified a lot of research and study that Dr. P has done on Joseph of Arimathea, amongst other things. So, you know, that was really good to see that excitement and some new factors coming out and actually a new level of research. So it's a real privilege to be able to see how that's received and learn more and work more in this. So we're going to go into that very, very soon. But what I want to do before is just speak to you about our forthcoming feast. But what I would like to also do is bring the team on in advance beforehand, before I just speak about that, because these gentlemen are also going to be there. They are part of the hosts for this feast, and it's very important to us. You are very important. So before we go any further, let me bring Dr. P on. Welcome, Dr. P.
Jesse.
Hey, John. John, welcome. And Drew, welcome.
Hi.
So Drew will be a host, and Dr. P and John, and actually Drew and myself and others, we will be ministering and speaking during the feast in the UK and Florida as well. But, you know, this is heavy on our hearts. It's about building community. That's why 2.5 years ago, nearly 3, Dr. P and I came together anyway with that vision of the different communities, the different nations that we touch, and the way in the UK then that it had exploded with a new understanding of Torah and a Hebraic understanding where the word was revealed in a completely different way. And that's sort of what tied us together. And when I say Dr. P and I, that's Stephanie, that's Sefer, that was Shane and I together and my family. And we continue that here. And that hasn't stopped. The thrust had to build community, to have an understanding of the Torah in our lives and how relevant it is for these prophetic times has only heightened and increased. And that's why last year we had taken these festivals to, well, they're sacred times, not festivals, these feasts, to Holland and Portugal, completely different dynamics. And again, next year we'll be doing that. In fact, I'm going to Portugal this Friday for a week to discuss about how we can build on that. And for them to come and be part of our tabernacling experience in September in the UK over here. So it's an ongoing work, and it's very much part of the call of Sefer and of the call of Eating While Honey. And everyone that you see here on the panel that I have the privilege to work with and who we all serve together, serving you, serving our nations, and most important, being ambassadors of the Torah, of scripture, of the Bereshit. That's the most important thing here. But these feasts are really important. Now, I'm going to take you to our website in a moment. Florida, it's the first time we're doing it internationally. And I was a bit nervous about that because I'm based in Britain, not over there. But Yah made it so that one friend that Stephen has introduced us to, who helped, as I said to you last time, in the critical weeks of Shane's last days of his life, which we didn't know it was last week or so, really instrumentally helped us as a family. And I think that type of union helped us go forward. And she's representing all the work that we are doing in America and doing the organization and that part of it with me to take in the registrations and so on, the bookings, and making out into the field and finding the right places, etc., so that we can bring Dr. Stephen, Sefer, Eating While Honey, and everyone together, and the different speakers, and yourselves together, so that we can be under the one place, tabernacling and worshipping together. And actually, for a first-time attempt in Florida, it's been a phenomenal response. We've had over 100 intense interests, and now people are booking that up. And I would urge you, it is on a first come first basis, because once the allocation of the 2 houses are secured, then if there is a quite overwhelming for more, we'll have to go for a 3rd property, but we've got to look at other logistics with that, because we might have to start looking for a complex and something like that. But you've been incredible. You've been absolutely incredible as far as Florida is concerned, for being a first-time experience. And it's a real difference to the UK mentality, because you are used to it over there in America, whereas in the United Kingdom, and now I'm speaking specifically to the folk in the UK and in Europe, this is new for us. I know that. For the last 3 years, going into 4, understanding what the feasts are, the significance of the feast, moving away from our Christmas tradition and the Easter tradition to the feast, it's been a lot to fathom. And some of you don't know how to embrace it. And that's why for the last 2 years, especially whilst my husband was alive, we just did it where it was a few days of the feast, in the full feast, as they say in America, rather than going for the full extension of it, to ease us into that. 1, so that you were eased. 2, for financially the expenses. But this year, I really sense the importance. We can't just stay at that level. We need to be together as a fellowship, with the opportunity and choice to come for the full days, for the full feast in September. I know in the United Kingdom, that is the beginning of the school for parents from all ages, from infants all the way up to our teenage children in their exams. And it's a critical time, because they're literally opening up the same time that we're back in, and we're doing the feast. Nevertheless, Yah provides a way, and you can have it on religious grounds to take that time off. So I didn't want to put that off this time round. But it's important that we are there together physically for this, and not just coming one weekend and cramming it all together and trying to do the cheapest alternative in a village hall or in a hall instead of a centre. And what I want to do this year, and it's a big step of faith, and John's going to come and add to this, is we want to bring this to you within, it's in Lilbourne, so that's the area where I reside, but we have some beautiful heritage here. And if any of you have watched Downton Abbey, if you just think of the manor home of Downton Abbey, that is where we could host the feast this year. But that is down to people from the UK and our regular fellowship people, and in Europe, securing the accommodation and their registration right now, so that we can get the best possible deal for you come September. I've had some real favor in certain ways with the company, and they're not asking for their normal terms that they would do, but in return I need action on your part. But what that means is we have some beautiful grounds where we could have the meetings daily. And for those that want to tabernacle and bring their caravans in, you can do that on these gorgeous, gorgeous grounds. They are amazing. The heart of England, forested grounds, beautiful prayer walks, beautiful trees and views. Others who do not want to stay on grass as such outside in the wilderness, they've got different budgets, from dorms for £20 per day for males and for females. Then they've got the next level of chalets for families and for people, £50 a day. And then some beautiful, exquisite rooms, only 50 of them, 15 in the manor house, and they're like £100 a night, which is really quite ridiculous for the type of room that you're getting. Now, if we get an intake straight away, they will reduce those prices. So that's where I need you to work with us. And I just want to show you here the potential of what we have to go to now. So many of you are asking me, how do I do this? So this is the website, Eating While Honey and Locust. So when you go there, it's eatingwhilehoneyandlocust.co.uk. On the right-hand side, straight away, you see videos. And then 2024 Sukkot registration. Likewise, you can see the next one is for the field guide books or eating while honey. And then right down at the bottom there, even a way to purchase books through Sefer, and that's via our code as well. So many of you are asking, how can I get this to support you? If you don't go through this link, then we don't get that support. So if you unintentionally go through the Sefer and you do that, you can't then contact Penny and say, could you please allocate it? It's so much work to do that. But here, if you go to the 2024 Sukkot registration, you can see everything is in one place. And I just want to focus on this second paragraph that we've put here. We're called to prepare a place for gathering to celebrate the harvest. It follows the time of self-examination and repentance, Tzitva, called Yom Kippur. The king is in the field. The gathering in Florida and UK is unique, not like most Sukkot meetings, in that we are blessed with the extraordinary in an extraordinary place where those who desire his Sukkot are welcome, comfortable, and enjoying his pure fellowship. Be aware this particular gathering is only for those who are called to it, those who desire such fellowship in such a season and would not miss it for anything. As we said on the road to Emmaus, didn't our hearts burn within us as he spoke? Come and celebrate with us if you feel the Father's sincere calling. And the reason I say that is because so many of you want to come, but in Britain we want to try and get things for as cheap as it possibly can, and it's really difficult to do that. I'm doing my very best here to make the very best celebration that you have. You can see that we've made a very big effort this time round for your registration. Couples will be receiving 2 Sefers and singles will be receiving 1 Sefer. This is the brand new leather-bound alternative, leatherette Sefer alternative to your registration, so that when you come now, if you already have them and you say that you would just want 1 or so, we can try and look to accommodate that. But this is how we have created a working budget to make the feast something very, very special for you. And you can see here the dates for the event. Then if you want to register for the UK, you go to this white box here, or likewise if you want to go to Florida, you press on that box, and then Ozark's Torah connection comes up. The wonderful Cheryl, who is dealing with it, there she is. And then it's got all the information that you require. And again, her explanation of why it is important for the tabernacle, for Sukkot, and for us to come together. And I urge you all to read that and go down to that. Here it's got an explanation of the beautiful facilities that we have. Because of the number of people that we have, we couldn't find a tenting for those days that would accommodate this, but we found 2 beautiful properties so far. You can see they're very luxury mansions. And so it affords us the opportunity to have a wonderful time together with you. And then it explains about the food package and everything else involved. So there is the registrations for families and for day visitors and for single people. Again, it includes the Sefer packages, and then you've got the prices for the rooms, etc. Please contact us should you need to for anything, and we will try our very best to serve you. But we really the focus here is for the UK and Europe to come together, not to leave it all to the last minute. I need you to help me so that I can really organize this so well for you, and that we have the very best here that we can offer for you. John, is there anything you'd like to add to that before we bring
Yeah, I think the thing is, in the UK, I think this is, a bit newer to us in terms of having sort of days of community. And I think one of the things we want to switch around this time is give that flexible option of camping, dormitories, rooms by yourself, etc. But also in terms of the days, we've been thinking about making it more interactive. So in the mornings, what I've been thinking about doing, and speaking to Jesse about and the team, is to the main event will be from 12 o'clock onwards, for instance, as it normally is for the main sessions, Dr. P, Jesse, Drew, and worship, etc. But in the mornings 9 till 12, I've been looking at running workshops. I'll be asking people to submit information to me for topics they want to cover. We've got a lot of specialists out there in the group. Malcolm knows a lot about the early church. Ruth knows a lot about environment. I had a chap called Paul, met us in Cornwall. He knew a lot of really interesting stuff about place names, etc. We've all got different skill sets, different talents. Stuart knows about radio gear. So it could be on any topic, but anything that will be meat for the group. So it can be anything but flat Earth. but no, I'm only joking. I even do flat Earth possibly, but the idea is to get together and commune. Now, this isn't going to be like school where you have to be there every day. People drop in for odd sessions they want to be in for. This is obviously a feast. It's a feast for community, a feast for worship, a feast for celebration, and solemnity. So we don't want to be at school 9 till 9, right? But at least it'll give people a chance to have a chat. And I'm quite helpful. If people want to email me, I'm on the email now as Enable this week. Thanks, Drew, for that, and Jess. So yeah, that's what we're thinking. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And Dr. P, this will be your 3rd year with Eating While Honey. You've been here for 2 or 3 years before that, serving these nations. And I was thinking about that today as I was praying. You do that part on your own expense. You have done all the time, and you come and you serve here. And we've got to take advantage of that, not because it's Dr. Stephen Pidgeon, but because we are so behind, and you afford us the opportunity to actually learn about the feasts, to be vulnerable and ask the questions that we need to. And we're going to make that so possible this time round. How we posture ourselves, how we worship, what they mean, why it is as important as the old habits that we had to do Easter and Christmas. And it's not something, it's as equally as important as your holidays, as your family time, because this is sacred and appointed times. And I think that's been, the holiness on that aspect has been lost. And you have been very humbly showing us that for several years. I really want that to be a focus this time round as we go into the different nations.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jesse. It's crazy because it's just like when I first started into mission work, I was called into mission work by this group, and they were saying, it's time for you to go do some mission work. And I thought to myself, me do mission work? You're crazy. You got the wrong enlistee, But nonetheless, I went out with the intent of doing mission work in Italy. Well, if I'm going to go on a foreign mission trip, I'm going to go to Italy, but don't you know? Well, of course, this was a prayer of mine that was uttered in 2001 that wouldn't come to fruition until 2020. It was 19 years of waiting. But Yah did say yes. He did say yes. He answered that prayer. But initially, my mission work was Russia. And I thought to myself, why are you taking me to Russia? A militant anti-communist, and you're taking him into Russia. What are you thinking? But anyway, it was Yah's doing and Yah's desire. But it never occurred to me at all that the UK would end up being my ultimate mission field. It just never crossed my mind. And in fact, I'd spent a little bit of time flying through London, but that was about it. And suddenly a door opened. And part of the reason the door opened was because of the research that we were doing. And some of my friends in Wales, namely Shane Stokes. Shane, of course, is a great guy. I love that kid. And his whole family, right, that has now blossomed, into a large tribe. But
the Von Trapp family.
Yeah, but the Von Trapp, yeah. But Shane was like,
rather than music.
Yeah, what's the sound of music? Yeah, he just says, you should come here. You could come here and see for yourself. And I thought, yeah, someday I'll do that. And the next thing I think it was 4 weeks later, I had a ticket and I was on my way, and flew into Gatwick, and so then things went from there. And now, Paul said last time I was with him, he said, I've lived here in England my whole life, born here. He says, I've seen more of the UK driving around with you than I've ever seen in my entire life, And of course, we've been everywhere, man. We've been everywhere. Not quite everywhere. We haven't been to Iona. We haven't been to the Orkneys. We haven't been up to the New Hebrides or the Shetlands, But other than that, we have been, I've sung in the Cathedral at Canterbury. Mm-hmm. I walked in the Abbey of Augustine in Canterbury. I've been in Caerphilly, I've been in Carnarvon, I've been up in the tower where Henry Gruber saw his vision, And of course, the trip in Cornwall for Pesach was enormously important. It was just enormously important to see, once you see Mara Zion for yourself, when you see that island for yourself, you see something that opens up doors. You just can't avoid it. You can't avoid the conclusion, And of course, this mission trip now has become really something else because, you're of course building the community. And of course, there's a lot of community, and we have a lot of community coming from many different circles. You might recall the baptisms in Lutterworth.
Yes.
We had people coming from many different circles for that baptism. And of course, the suffering that goes on in the UK, because there's never a time that we're not accompanied with somebody having passed away.
Yeah, I know.
And for me, it's brutal, but for the people who are experiencing it, it's much more brutal. I mean, they're in mourning, and grieving. Yeah. And so, I just got a word from somebody else in Britain whose father is now on his very last hours, very last days.
Gosh.
And but the thing is that that can't stop what it is we're doing in the ministry. And what we're doing in the ministry is not necessarily, we're not trying to build a church. We're not trying to build a religion. What we're trying to do is we're trying to point out the truth, right? I mean, when you look at the testimony of Mashiach, right? So one of the questions we used to ask, why was he born and why did he come to the earth? That's a question. Fair question. That's a question. Well, he gives us the answer in John 18. It was for this reason I was born, and this reason I came to the earth. What was it? To testify to the truth. All those who are of the truth hear my voice. So this is not about building a religion or building a religion based on a community based on a religion. This is about testifying to the truth, that the truth might be known, that Yah's word be true and every man a liar. That what effaces out of all of this is that there is a conclusion that is reached, and the conclusion is reached through critical thinking of people looking at this and making an analysis and going, that is true. That's what we're looking at today, and that's why today's PowerPoint is going to be the most important discussion of all. Although last week was absolutely incredible, the revealment about Joseph Arimathea was so incredibly important. I can't begin to tell you how important that was. And why do I say it was so important? Because this truth is now beginning to be unveiled. Now, there's one aspect to the truth. There are many people looking at this. It's not just us. There's professors at Hebrew University that are looking at the same kind of initial data surrounding the Dead Sea Scrolls, what happened in the first century, and so on and so forth, trying to get a conclusion on what's going on. And one thing that I hope people will keep in mind, and that is that you have to keep in mind that Paul, Shaul, was an egregious sinner. Okay, the murdering side of his was just one side of him. The kind of zealot he was with the persecution of the faith, and now not only was he a persecutor of the faith, but his family were engaged in like criminal behavior, very criminal behavior. But to say this, so it's very easy to look at Paul and go, that guy, right? However, bear in mind that he went through repentance. Okay, and so when you read the book of Romans, you will see the repentance in the heart of Paul. You'll see that repentance. And so, notwithstanding the fact that the church has misused his writings to put him in a place where you think he's the Messiah when he isn't, but you must bear in mind that those writings stem from his repentance as a person. What his life was before that repentance was horrific. And it's something to understand. However, the whole foundation of us finding out what was going on, and this is what's so critical about this feast. When Joseph Arimathea arrived in Britain, never to leave again, he arrived here with a practice of the faith, and he arrived here espousing the faith that was, by the way, not unknown to them, because the people in Cornwall had met Mashiach before. They met him. They knew him. He lived among them. And when Joseph Arimathea came in and said, this is what happened, this is what occurred, the first ones to say, yes, that is true, were the very same ones who had visited Miriam on the day of the birth of the Messiah, the Magi, which were, of course, the Druids. And the Druids readily embraced the narrative of Joseph Arimathea. And this is when the Romans went, oh yeah, kill them all. 51 AD, kill them all. Especially get that Joseph Arimathea. Kill that guy. And so when we look at today's PowerPoint, what we're going to be seeing is what was the practice of Joseph Arimathea when he arrived on British shores? Did he practice a Sunday worship? Answer is absolutely not. The Sunday worship would not come for another 300 years. Another 300 years. Did he practice Easter? Absolutely not. He wasn't in the cult of Isis or the fertility goddess worship. Wasn't there. So what did he practice? Shabbat. And he practiced and kept the feast. How do we know this? Because all four Gospels tell us this. All four, it's not in the Old Testament. It's in the New Testament. What did Mashiach say? He tells his disciples, go into town, and of course they deleted the name, the Romans deleted the name, find Joseph Arimathea and tell him we need the upper room. And while you're there, pick up his donkey and bring it back out here for me. Oh, okay. Because what does he say to the disciples? Because we shall keep the Pesach. We shall keep the Pesach. Does anybody in the Christian faith believe that the Last Supper happened on a completely dislocated night that had nothing to do with the Passover? Of course not. Yeah. Everybody knows it was associated with the Passover. Let's keep the Passover, the Pesach. Similarly, Joseph Arimathea comes to Pilate and says, hey, I need the body. You do? Yeah, I have to have the body before sundown when we come into the high Shabbat. It's very clear information that Joseph Arimathea was a feast keeper, was a Sabbath keeper, was Torah observant, knew all these things. And in order for you to keep the Pesach, you have to know what is the 14th day of the first month, don't you? Or do you just keep it whenever you feel like it? No, you know when the 14th day of the first month was. Does that mean January 14th? Nope. No, it does not. It means the 14th day of Aviv. So you can see that when you all of a sudden you can look at this and go, aha, Sabbath keeper, feast keeper, calendar observant. That was the first church. So when we look at this in the 7th month, we're called to this Feast of Tabernacles. Now, this Feast of Tabernacles, unlike Yom Kippur, which is a feast of self-affliction, okay, and an atonement, unlike Yom Teruah, which is a warning, time for you to gain self-audit. Yeah, there you go. There it is. There you go. Thanks, Sue. That's exactly right. Like we did when those ancient feet walked upon Britain's mountains green. Yep, absolutely. And so when you see this now,
I'll be right back.
Okay, Drew. So anyway, when you see this, I'm sorry for cutting into Drew's time, but anyway, I just want to point this out, that when you get to the tabernacles, this is a feast. Why is it a feast? Because the Word was made flesh and tabernacled among us. These 7 days were the 7 days that the Magi came to Miriam and said, we know the baby is born. Where's the baby? We have gifts. This is when the shepherds came and celebrated around the Sukkah in which Joseph and Miriam were staying. Why? Because there was no room at the inn. Why was there no room at the inn? Because all the males were at Jerusalem as they were called to for the 3 times a year. That's why there was no room at the inn. There was no room at the inn because they were all celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles. That's why there was no room at the inn. That's why they ended up in Bethlehem. Right? So now it starts to make sense. Oh, okay. Were they in a manger? No, they were in a sukkah, a booth. And so when you talk, and how is it that Hannah and Shimon, when Miriam would present the Mashiach on the 8th day, the last great day, that's what they call it, Shemini Atzeret, the last great day. And where is it identified as the last great day? In the gospel. And on the last great day, they present the child at the temple. And Shimon looks at him and goes, are you trying to tell me that this kid was born on the first day of Tabernacles? That also fell under this incredible planetary sign that we saw? And that he was born in Bethlehem? Yeah, that's what we're trying to tell you. Mine eyes have seen the consolation of Yasharel. That's what he says.
Yeah.
And then Hannah confirms that 2 witnesses, one from the southern kingdom, one from the northern kingdom, they both confirm that this is the consolation of Yasharel, because the word was made flesh and tabernacled among us. So this 8 days of tabernacles is the birthday party of the Mashiach.
That's right.
That's what this is. So when you're taught in the Roman Church, well, we keep Christmas. Well, what does that mean? Well, you cut down a tree. It has to be cut down in order to celebrate, the severing of Nimrod's phallus. That's why the tree has to be cut down. Put that in your living room, and then put the womb of Isis on your door in the form of a wreath, and then bring home a bunch of cheap plastic toys, and all the kids open the toys, and then by noon everybody's fed up, and let's get out of here and do something else. That's a half-day celebration, at best a one-day celebration that you spend 5 months preparing for. I'll get it for Christmas. Why can't you get it for me now? What were you going to get me for Christmas? I was going to get you some suntan lotion. Well, it's in the middle of winter. Why do I need suntan lotion at Christmas, right? But you compare that to Tabernacles. Tabernacles isn't a 45-minute event. It's an 8-day event.
8 days.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Well, it's hard to fathom because I'm very time constrained in my job and my work, and even getting family holidays is a test. So 8 days for a feast is kind of like blow my mind a bit in terms of what do you do for 8 days.
Well, you could do like they do in a lot of communities and just have a big midrash where you argue with everybody. No, I'll tell you,
no, that's what John said is what we're having to combat here for the UK. I don't think it's as much in America, but it is here. So that's why I wanted to address it.
Yeah, in an 8-day period of time, and this is a thing, that I wish, let me try to convey this. And this is a skill I picked up being on the road with rock and rollers, okay? Because when you're on the road, all you really see are your bandmates. You don't see anybody else, really. You meet people here and there, but really the people you see full time are your bandmates, and you see them every day for hours on a time, every 7 days a week, week after week after week after week after week. And you want to know why bands break up hating each other? When Emerson, Lake and Palmer broke up, when they had a gig to play, they would fly in on 3 separate planes because they didn't want to see each other until the gig, right? In order to keep Greg Lake punching out Carl Palmer, But thing is that you learn the skill of living with another person that's a stranger. And you learn the skill of living with another person who's a stranger. Part of that is in recognizing each other for who you are, taking your time, being gentle, and particularly being gentle about your opinion. Everybody doesn't need to believe like you believe in the first 15 minutes you're there.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you should compromise your position on something, but wait until it's timely for you to speak. Be cautious and serve one another, and be careful with one another, and be gentle with one another. This kind of a thing. And this is an approach. Now, the approach that was taken in Qumran was an approach that was much more collectivized, right? They had a collective fund, and they had a level of piety, and that piety was engaged in like almost vows of poverty. Now there's no expectation that that's going to be the case at Sukkot. And you have to recognize that you have to maintain a place of your privacy that's for you.
Mm-hmm.
And you join into communities you can, and make it a point of view to don't just hang with your little group, move from your group to visit other people.
Correct.
And eat meals with this group and eat meals with that group and share some time with each other and just get to know each other. And then like the Sukkot that was in Holland last year was really quite beautiful and wonderful because there were teachings in different venues,
Mm.
with different places. And the teaching was at different time, different presentations. And it's like John said, it's not school. Not everybody has to be in school 8 hours a day. You can attend every session if you want. There's something stopping you from doing it. And particularly when you mentioned, John, about the early morning schedule being filled up by other people, like Paul in Cornwall.
Yeah.
I mean, he showed up with a suitcase full of information, right?
Yeah.
He was. I'm like, Paul, I can't read a suitcase worth of information in 15 minutes, right? But he had literally a full suitcase, but it would be good to have people sharing from these kinds of experiences, and in addition to that, there were also weddings that took place in Holland. There were baptisms that took place. All of these things that were happening. Little by little, some here, some there. We're going to do this event here. We're going to do that there. And then, of course, really the big issue is meal preparation, meal cleanup. That goes on, right? And not only meal prep and meal cleanup, which really everybody needs to participate in, but also at night, like if we've got access to a fire pit, there's getting the fire going, there's the fire and talking. And of course, during all of this, there should be robust worship taking place. Lots of it, lots of singing.
And we've got the grounds this year, so we must take advantage of it. I showed you the video where we can be out in the dark with the beautiful lights under the stars and the hills of what you can see. And, just be so beautiful.
Yeah, may Yah bless it with clear skies. Yeah. It would be terrific. And under those circumstances, then you can really, and of course, during all of this is rest. A lot of people have schedules that are just like breakneck. You go to work and you're working hard all the time. And then all of a sudden you've got this time off. Well, a lot of it is about, slowing your pace, slowing your heart rate down, taking your stress level down, relaxing, enjoying a conversation, moving kind of slow. That's Uncle Joe. He's moving kind of slow at the junction, And so all of those kinds of things help in terms of you celebrating the feast. But really, so much of it is really about singing. I mean, it really is.
Beautiful worship. That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I can't sing, but I love to hear it and try.
You can make like a Lauren Green, who when he did this song Ringo, and just speak out the lyrics.
The other thing before we move on to the presentation, it's this year we've got Ed Chumney who is joining us, so he's alongside you. We've really got a great way now to have more to share. I think it's fantastic that he contacted us and he wants to be part of this. And, so he's going to be there possibly for the whole 8 days now. Not to do
that's
stuff.
fantastic.
It's not a midrash, so we're not doing calendars. But, I've had a great meeting with him on Sunday and he's so looking forward. He met with you first a few years ago, he said, at the Lion and the Lamb, and you gave him one of your first publications, and he has that. So that's going to be
good. Eddie is such a brilliant scholar, and the way he teaches, he's like a machine gun going off, right? And he loads it up. He's got a 50 caliber weapon there, and he's got 100 rounds of scriptural citations.
Yeah.
And so his opinion doesn't come in at all. It's just boom, 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 and it keeps going. By the time he's done with 100 citations, you're persuaded. Yeah, okay, Eddie. I mean, you've hit the ball right out of the park. And this is why, among all the teachers, I think in the entire community, I really like Eddie Chumney, because his teaching is so scripturally based, so scripturally relevant, so on point, and so well delivered. And So, I mean, he's going to be, if Eddie is coming to teach, he's going to be a huge blessing to the community in his teaching. And well, even if he only teaches once, but if he teaches more than that, it's going to be well worth it, because his discussion will be really very, very persuasive. Once you hear it, you're going to be very, very persuaded by what he's saying, because it's the scripture talking, not Eddie talking.
Well, you know, when I had the meeting with him on Sunday, Dallas whispered, so we have 2 Dr. P's in the house this year then, because we're meeting with him. It was just like speaking with you, shooting off the history. And, you know, it's to do with our current Foundations of Faith, the series that we're doing. It was actually quite wonderful for the 2 hours maybe that we spoke. So it's going to be good. Everything that you said I resonate with. It's just, it's going to be exciting. It really is. And he's committed to the 8 days. So guys, it's for this reason we are really investing so much in this, so that we can come together in that shadow, thanking him for taking us out of that wilderness, looking and preparing ourselves set apart until Yahushua's return, and giving you the very best that we can here in our locality, so that you are equipped and we're together, you know, fired up for these 8 days that we have. Thanks, Stephen. Thank you also for what you're doing to make this possible. And John too, you know.
I'm looking forward to John's teaching then as well as today.
Yes.
John's presentations are quite exhaustive, very, very good, and I think they're going to be outstanding during the Sukkot presentation. It's going to be very, very good, and we should not, ignore the contributions. Like, I don't know if Cheryl's going to be doing any teaching. She could, Jesse, if you're.
I would love her to. She at the moment she's saying no. But we'll see.
She is saying no. Okay, all right. But Cheryl does know a great deal about and so forth. And so anyway, but we're going to have plenty of time. And did Dallas get his guitar from Germany? Do you know?
Yeah, he did. He's got it. So,
okay. All right. Good. Okay.
You want us to bring it over? Are you bringing yours?
No, I'm not going to bring mine. Fortunately, I think Stuart will be interested in loaning me his, which would be a good thing. Okay. And I hope he will. And anyway, but I think it is really important. And I don't know if Ruth is going to be there or not.
Yes, but, Ruth is going to be there. Dallas will be for the UK and Florida, but we probably won't be able to bring our guitars over for Florida, but we will for the UK.
That's all right. I've got some friends in Florida. The old guys in Leonard Skinner. We can borrow their guitars.
Oh.
I'm kidding.
Oh, no. So it'll be good. So guys, please get in touch. Even though I'm in Portugal, I'm still contactable. Whilst it's a bit of a break, it is also ministry. So I'll still be contactable there. But right now, I want to hand over to John so that we've got the time for this presentation. John, why don't you give us a recap from last week before we go into...
Yeah, I've actually built it into the slides now, Jess, for the recap. So we'll take it through there if that's okay. I put 3 slides in from last time, so we'll spin through. So this time, Jess, this isn't the right one. It's one more recent than this one. I think I sent tonight. I'll say that, but it's got a red examination. When it's live, I put red.
Is it this one?
It's another PowerPoint, Jess. I sent tonight. In the
that's
email.
the one I just received. Just hold on. And just give a recap while I try and find it.
Okay, yeah. So basically, I think we're blessed now. I think it's one side it's scary, because one of the things I want to go through on the slides is the fact that Yahweh told the prophets of old to bury the knowledge until the end of time in jars. So I think it's quite scary to look at the Qumran and other findings we found, around the world that have been found in the, one of the 900s, but the rest like in the 40s and 50s, to think that they're for our generation. So I get really upset when I hear that the Vatican's holding 75% of the Dead Sea Scrolls back from us, right? And you're thinking, well, of these 300 scrolls, there's only a few being released to us, and it's meant for us. So that's one thing I get upset about. But the other thing I get upset about is when I wanted to do the presentation today, I couldn't use all the information I wanted to use because of copyright, because one of the translators of the Dead Sea Scrolls, one of the 4 key people at the beginning, put a lawsuit out against anybody using any of his translations. So the Israeli government, for about 10 years now, have been prosecuting people trying to publish the Dead Sea Scrolls. So that's led to a situation now where people are frightened to use them. But when you start seeing the snippets from today, you'll see the foundation of a chord. This is it, yes, perfect, right at the top. It's live. Sorry. It's my little signature, so I know it's the right PowerPoint.
Okay.
So, so I think as we go through today, the slides will tell. Let's spin through the slides. If we go to the next slide, that'd be great. So today, we're going to do an examination of the Essenes and Nasaraeans, as you'll see. We'll go through that. Next slide, please. So this presentation is for teaching and educational purposes only, not for profit, not for resale. All articles are clearly referenced. The book in the middle on the left says The Complete Dead Sea Scrolls in English by Guy Vermes. That's not a bad book, right? This guy's an Oxford academic. He spent his lifetime in in academia, looking at the Dead Sea Scrolls, doing translations, etc. That book in it is very cheap on the market now for a few dollars, literally secondhand, or you get it new, and has, as it says at that time, the complete Dead Sea Scrolls. So everything that's been translated is in there. So it's one of those. I rarely give a shout out apart from the Sefer, but for this one, I would say it's something that would be worth having in a bookshelf if this presentation makes any sense to you. Okay. So let's spin on. Next slide, please. So, okay. So usual suspects. It says at the bottom now we've added Philo of Alexandria, his contemporary. Again, we're going to go to first witness accounts. So the first witness for us is going to be the Dead Sea Scrolls and Philo primarily. Okay, for bits and pieces. Next slide. Right, this is interesting. Right, so Guy Vermes, who's the academic, in the statement here, says, it is clear from the literature that the sectaries regarded themselves as the true Yasharel, the repository of authentic traditions of the religious body from which they had seeded. This is the chap that spent his lifetime, or part of his lifetime, decoding the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, so these people, and again, that they thought they were the real Yasharel, the remnant, okay, the seed. And that's not from somebody born again, right? Well, may have been born again, but I don't think so. We've seen this part of the slide before when we did the Parthians, and I see it shouting out again, right? When I see absolute destruction and the overwrite of history, like with the Parthians, as we do here with the Essenes, you get suspicious. The George Orwell misquote here: the most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of their own history. Right? I do believe the Essenes and Nazareans are part of our history. On the left, you can see where it's been destroyed, etc. It's suspicious. I mean, look, you Google Mycenae, right, and you'll see snake cults. Nazarene, you see all sorts of things coming from Egypt and stuff. I've got various books over the past few weeks on the Essenes, and I've got past life memory, people doing hypnosis. I've got angelic communications. I've got all sorts of. It's like Dr. P going to Glastonbury and seeing all the white witches in the crystal shops. You get the same thing on the internet now. It's absolutely horrible. So all I'm saying here, keep an open mind and make up your own mind after this presentation, because we're going to go to source now, not from hearsay. Okay.
Yeah. Now, before you go on, the Dead Sea Scrolls Deception, working with Eisenman, an expert in biblical archaeology.
Yes,
Yeah. They uncovered the story of how 75% of the 800 ancient Hebrew and Aramaic manuscripts still remain concealed from the world today. This is true. Now, Eisenman has had some very interesting things to say, John, about Essenes, Nazarenes, Ebionites, etc. Eisenman believes that many of the scrolls, in fact, were written in the 1st century. That the community at Qumran of Damascus, the community there was in fact governed by James the Just, the brother of Mashiach. This is what Eisenman has concluded, that James the Just was there, and that this was a community of poverty. And of course, when you read the community rules that came out of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the community rules have also something else to say in terms of how the community was going to run. It ran very much on a collective system. But the point is that this business that is trying to be pointed, what Eisenman is pointing out is that Eisenman was the one that came forward and said, "Hey, you guys stop hogging the Dead Sea Scrolls and put them out for other people to see." And he was literally one of the scholars who forced this stuff out in the open. Now, I think that Eisenman's critique is a reasonable critique. I think it's a reasonable critique. And he has a lot to say concerning Shaul, Paul. And of course, we see some of the agitation of Paul taking place in the Ascents of James, right? That book, The Ascents of James, found in the Clementine Homilies. That text has got a whole bunch of discussion that tends to confirm what Eisenman was saying about what kind of an agitator Shaul really was. Now, one point that he made that I thought was very, very interesting that Eisenman has made is that you remember Paul claimed to be a Benjamite, right? Remember this?
Oh, yeah.
And Eisenman says that was a code word for him being an Herodian, an Edomite Herodian.
Oof.
Yeah, that was a code word that Paul was in fact an Herodian. Now, this, in my mind, still does not disqualify the writings of Paul. And the reason why I say it doesn't disqualify the writings of Paul is because I believe Peter, too, was an Herodian. He was certainly married to a Herodian. He was married to Mariamne IV, the granddaughter of Herod the Great. That's who his wife was. His mother-in-law was Mariamne III, who would later become Beatrice, the queen of Armenia, quote unquote. She had married the next in line to be the true Maccabean king. You remember that? I know I get kind of far afield here, but let me just share. Herod beheaded the last king of the Maccabees controlling the Hasmonean Empire, which was Antigonus. He beheaded him in Jericho, Antigonus. But Antigonus had a son, Aristobulus IV. And Aristobulus IV would marry Herod's daughter, Mariamne III. Their daughter was Mariamne IV, who married Peter. And when Mashiach healed Peter's mother-in-law, he was healing the daughter of Herod the Great.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, to try to say, okay, well, we have to write Paul out because he was a Herodian. Well, I mean, you can see that when I say that Paul's prior life prior to his conversion was really reprobatic, he even admits it. He says, of the sinners, I was the worst. In Timothy says, this is who I used to be, right? All these sins that he's laying out, this is who I used to be. Well, this is true. So, but give Paul the room that we're willing to give so many people today who are born again, that he was a repentant heart. And I think Romans makes it clear. He was a repentant heart. And his writings were that followed his repentance. Okay, so give him some room on that respect. But like I say, Eisenman's work cannot be underestimated or discredited. He continues to work diligently to this day to try to force them to come forward with the Dead Sea Scrolls. They don't want to come forward with the other 80% because the other 80% are, guess what? New Testament writings. They're first century writings. And yes, you see this picture of Qumran here on the left. Now, I have been in Qumran, John. I was there before they began reassembling the stones. Okay? I was there before they began reassembling the stones.
Before this picture.
Before this picture. And I'm telling you, it was a ruinous heap. It was a ruinous heap. You walk through the community and you can see where there used to be houses and stuff and all this kind of thing. But every stone was turned over. It was a ruinous heap. And the reason they made it a ruinous heap, the copper scroll unveils, because the copper scroll tells you they built Qumran as a inverted retrograde image of Jerusalem. In other words, they flipped the pattern over and flipped it sideways. And because of that, you could tell the exact location of the temple, which was not on the Temple Mount.
Yeah. I've found something else on that as well, but we'll discuss that some of the time.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's good. One thing that you brought out there's still far more to come out. I wasn't too sure of that. Now I am. That's quite amazing that there's still more that is being withheld. That's part of this series, what's been rewritten or avoided. So that's very important.
Yeah, anyway. Yeah, it is. It's really important. If you spin to the next slide, I mean, basically, you'll see. Just if you go to the next slide, that'd be great. Thank you. So on here, all right, that was, one of the crying shames of this, because there's so much hidden from us, is these documents are saved for a faraway time in the future, the end of days for us. If you read the Assumption of Moses here, it says, And now I declare unto you, the time of years of my life is fulfilled, and I am passing away to sleep with my fathers, even in the presence of all the people. And receive these writings, that you may know how to preserve the books which I shall deliver unto you. And you shall set up in order and anoint them with oil of cedar, and put them away in earthen vessels, in jars, basically, in this place which he made from the beginning of the creation of the world, that his name should be called upon until the day of repentance, in the visitation wherewith the Lord will visit will visit them in the consummation of the end of days. So there's the typeset, there's the model, there's the Moses saying, put things away in earthen jars until the time of the end. Now, if you look beneath it, these are some of the hordes, right? Which you got the Qumran horde, which I'd never heard of before. Obviously, I've had a sheltered life, but there we go. 818 AD was found just outside Jericho. Jars. Dr. P, I don't know if you've come across that one at all. They got the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nicaea Library, all of them in jars. And then the Clementines, as we say, which are quoted by Epiphanius as being used by the Ebionites for their doctrines.
Yeah, so, and again, the Ebionites, remember that according to Eisenman, the Ebionites, the Essenes, the Nasaraeans, same basic group.
Yes, they are. No, same group, same philosophy. Exactly. Spot on.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Okay. So that's that bit. Let's have a recap now, just quickly. Sorry, lots of slides here. So, Dr. P, in this slide, I added the feasts. Okay, so probably the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th column along, you got feasts. So you can see that the Nazareans and Essenes are in green, because they're confirmed as going to the temple and holding all the main feasts. Okay, as we go through. So I think the thing from this slide, really, from the last time, was at the bottom here, you got the Essenes, Nazareans, and Essenes. The three groups there all had the same philosophy. The last two, the Nazareans and Essenes, under James, seem to be conflated to the Nasini. And then, as they fled the first Jewish war, the fall of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, they became, by default, the Nazareans, by virtue of they're like the Christians. They're the Nazareans because they followed Jesus of Nazareth. So that's a generic term. So people might get confused with the term Nazarenes at the top and Nazareans afterwards. The Nazareans is a collective whole, like a name, like you might say Christianity now, even though there's lots of different sects, right? Nazarenes are the same thing for them. And the Ebionites were refined out of those. And the Ebionites are the closest ones to the original Essenes and Nazareans and James, etc.
But we do note they practice a vegetarianism. And who was it that criticized the vegetarians? It was Paul that criticized the vegetarians. And not only did Paul criticize the vegetarians, but he said it was okay to eat meat sacrificed unto idols if you pretend you didn't know it was sacrificed unto idols, right? And he wrote that in Corinth. And I'm telling you, in Corinth, I've been in Corinth, and I can tell you the temple of Apollo sits up on the hill. And there's the road that went from that went up to the temple where they herded the cattle up there for slaughter. That went right by the synagogue. I mean, the synagogue was right on that path, and the house that was Rufus's house where he stayed was right behind that synagogue. And by the way, that house was about 16 by 16 feet square. That was the size of the house, right? Little tiny.
How many floor?
Yeah. And the temple of Apollo up there, by the way, the difference between the temple of Apollo and the temple of Zeus in Athens, Zeus's pillars were stacked sections and then carved. The temple of Apollo had continuous pillars, no stacking. And they were painted bright red. And Corinth was the most despicable city in the entire Mediterranean. It was a sex trafficking capital. It was the armpit of Greece. Every sin you could possibly imagine was practiced there. And they took those cattle right by the synagogue, walked it right up the hill. It's only about maybe 100 feet. Walked it up the hill, sacrificed the cattle, and then they'd take it down the backside of the hill, down to the marketplace on the far side. So in order to buy the meat, you'd have to walk up the street up here to the main part of Corinth, go by the baths, make a right into the shopping section, and then there you would find the meat. So if you went up there and you bought the meat from that market, instead of going up to the temple and getting it, you could pretend it wasn't sacrificed to idols. But all the slaughter was going on at that temple. Now bear in mind, They're slaughtering beef up at this temple, right? Slaughtering cows, slaughtering sheep. Okay. Now, anybody who's ever been around a slaughtering plant knows it stinks like you would not believe, right?
Yep. Yep.
This is where all the temple prostitutes worked, up in this bloodbath. Okay? I mean, just to kind of give you an idea of how bad this whole section was. And it turns out that Paul's brother, Rufus, with whom he was staying there in Corinth, was a bad actor before Paul got there. Really bad. He was in the middle of all of that stuff that was going on in Corinth. Okay? So, and now here you see the Nazareans practicing vegetarianism. And if you read the humane gospel of the Essenes, right, that is a doctrine that spells out the vegetarian point of view, right?
Yeah. Cool. That's interesting. I mean, it's just, I mean, it's good to get the background for some of these things, because you sort of see Corinth, you think, oh, this might be a palatial place, it's by the sea, and then suddenly it's like, it's worse. Worse than Amsterdam, worse than Bruges, worse than any of these places for certain things.
Was
and then
Odessa of the day. I mean, when you think about it, I mean, look, first of all, you got to remember, what was the Athenian culture like? What was the Greek culture like? It was pretty decadent during this whole period anyway. But then when you get to Corinth, right now there's a canal up there that connects the Aegean Sea with the Sea of Corinth. And it's the same size as the Suez Canal. So a Suez class ship can transit through that canal, built by the same guys who built the Suez Canal, same group. Nero tried to build that canal, and then his engineer said, the water is higher in the Sea of Corinth than it is in the Aegean, which is stupid. But that's what he told him. So Nero, who had the project half done, abandoned it, and it stayed abandoned until the 19th century, when they finally cut the canal in. Well, before then, all the shipping that wanted to go in the Sea of Corinth would come up the Aegean, park offshore. Then they would take the ships up on logs, roll them over to the Sea of Corinth, and put them in. Well, while they're rolling the ship over, all those sailors are partying in Corinth. That's what the town was. It was a sailor's seaport, right?
Yeah. Say no more. Say no more. Okay.
That pretty much spells it out, doesn't it? Yeah.
Let's go. Back on. Jess, next slide, please. That'd be great. Thank you. So as we move on, next, bit of a recap still. We found out of all these different sects that it's the Essenes and Nasaraeans that both claimed heritage back to Yasharel. Okay, none of the others did. So that was kind of a call-out time. If we go again to the next slide, please, Jess. Then basically, this is where we kind of went over this before, and basically this sect practices Judaism in all respects, keeping the same observances, festivals, circumcision, Sabbath, etc., recognized as fathers of the persons of the Pentateuch from Adam to Moses, who are illustrious in their excellence for piety. Difference is no faith, no astrology, but would not accept the Pentateuch. So we're going to focus on that through the session a bit. Are these guys, like Mad Max? So they've got their own law thing going on, or have they moderated things slightly from before? Okay, so that'll be interesting. If we go to the next slide. So then, is there any evidence to a possible corruption of the Torah? Okay, so Zephaniah suggests that there is, and this was before the Babylonian captivity. So Zephaniah was probably about 630 BCE, okay, a long time ago. And it says in 3:1, woe to her that is filthy and polluted to the oppressing city. She paid not the voice, she received not correction, she trusted not in Yahweh, she drew not near to her Elohim. Her princes within her are roaring lions, her judges are evening wolves, they gnaw not the bones till the morrow. Her prophets are liars and treacherous persons, her priests have polluted the sanctuary, they have done violence to the Torah. So there's something being mentioned there, that the Torah has been abused, changed somehow. Okay, so that's the smoking gun a bit to say there's a possibility there that maybe the Torah given wasn't quite written down correctly, or had been the line pen of the scribes or something like that. Okay. if we go to the next slide, then this is where we start to get into the meat of it. So the Essenes and Nasaraeans, right? So it can be confusing reading about these sects. History has not been kind to their heritage. The Essenes and Nazareans are talked about freely as the same entity at times, later being conflated to Nasini under James. We do have two clear paths, however, showing two sides of the same community and reflected by the following evidences. So as Dr. P mentioned, there's the Dead Sea Scrolls of lots of scrolls and documents with different names. So there's a Damascus document, which is kind of a village lay existence, which describes how to run a community. And there's another document there called the Community Rule document, which is in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which describes the ascetics living in a kind of monastic society. So there we have two different types of existence in the same community. Okay. The train of thought is some substance based on the below article. So Timothy H. Lynn, professor of Hebrew and Biblical Studies in Edinburgh, says the Essenes were a Jewish sect of school of philosophy with two branches. Some were celibate, disdained marriage and adopted children. Others believed that marriage and procreation were needed if the group was to continue and not disappear. So he's agreeing that there's two different paths for the same group. So looking at the previous evidences through Epiphanius, etc., these people seem to have the same Torah and belief systems, vegetarian, etc., as you'll see, but two different paths. So even Philo, when he describes the Essenes, is actually describing the Damascus document, which talk about more the Nasaraeans. So this might be a big step here, and people may not agree with me, but I'm going to suggest that the Essenes fit the community rule documents because they're the religious sects based in village communities and throughout Yasharel and cities. They require two years induction, strictly men only, and adopt young children to the age of 10, as you'll see. And the Nazareans are the Damascus document, which is a village-based community which hold the same law and tenets as the Essenes, but with a family life and open to all peoples with Hebrew lineage, same Torah understanding. So that's my interpretation. Now, I can't see anything to say that that's wrong, but looking at the evidences from Philo, looking at the evidences of the changed doctrines of the Torah, both for the Nazareans and Essenes and the Damascus document and the community rule document, it kind of conflates and makes sense. As we go through the study, we'll take a look. Okay. Here's the next one. So this is a funny old slide, but I'll put this together today. The idea here is that we've got to describe something. And what we're going to describe is, on the left, I've called it the age of the prophets. You've got roughly, these are rough dates, 850 BC from Obadiah and Joel, right the way through to Malachi 425 BC. That's 425 years. You had 18 prophets. So Yah's been speaking to us with 18 different voices, at least, over that period, all documented and at our disposal. That's 425 years. If you're taking exactly 425 years back again from that to zero, right? Zero prophets. So that's kind of interesting. It might be, may not be symmetrical, but with my rough dates, it was symmetrical, so I kept it symmetrical. However, sorry, Dr. P.
That's very fascinating, and I think if you go 425 years to the next place, you're going to find the Exodus as well.
Yeah, probably. It's kind of interesting. But in the middle of that, 425 on the right, there's this thing called that this person arises called the teacher of righteousness, right at the Hasmonean or right at the Hellenistic side of things, where it gets really bad for them, basically. And Hugh Sconfield describes this true teacher and says he's the outspoken champion of the divine laws. He's detested by the wicked priests of his day, basically the other priests in the temple, to whom God made known all the mysteries of the words of his servants, the prophets, led his followers out of the wilderness to observe the laws of Moses in their purity. Now, one thing about this is the Essenes, when you look at the documentation, their highest feast of the year was the Feast of Weeks, because that's when Moses gave the Torah. So they had that feast above all other feasts at the time. Now, obviously, we've had Yahushua since then, and now we got his birthday coming up in Sukkot, so that's our high feast, right? But for these guys, it was the giving of the law. Okay, so the Essenes would not refer to him by his real name, but would hide his identity through the teacher of righteousness. Now, this guy, he could be fruitcake, right? In that case, he could be a real prophet, or it could be, it could be a Despertini person, for I know, right? We don't know. But as a person of law, of prophecy, and of leadership that's arisen out of at this time and taken them and started Qumran off, basically.
Now this is very fascinating because when you see this, of course, Shavuot, Pentecost, is really and continues to be the real center feast. It's the center of the menorah. It is the shamash. It is the servant light. And it really is. And you can see prophecy hinging around Shavuot.
Wow.
It's a turning point in all things, really. And even this last Shavuot, I thought was really, really an important Shavuot, as it marked all of this business with this, massive eclipse we had in the United States, with all of these massive solar storms that have been coming over the world now. All of these things have been following Shavuot. And so, I can understand this. Now, they refused to name who this teacher was, the teacher of righteousness. Right?
Yeah, they refused to name him. And again, I don't know if it's like the the Wild West with wanted posters out there. People have voted. You could see with the Despertini priests, right? There was something like 15 of them in the space of 60 years or something stupid. These guys have a very short life expectancy. so at that time they're being hunted by the Greeks. So
and so they probably, a teacher of righteousness could be called Malachi Tzaddik, right? Tzaddik, righteousness. Malak would be messenger, the messenger of righteousness, Malachi Tzaddik. Now, this is also interesting too, John, because they found another temple in Jerusalem, in addition to the one they found in the city of David. They found another temple that was down in the valley that they're not knowing what to call it. So some of the references are saying, well, that's the temple of Malachi Tzaddik. Well, if Malachi Tzaddik, this teacher of righteousness, if the Hebrew name is Malachi Tzaddik, now you can see where the Hebrew writer comes in and says, well, Mashiach came in the order of Malachi Tzaddik, the teacher of righteousness, right? He came in the order of Malachi Tzaddik, the teacher of righteousness. And so was there ever a time that there was not a teacher of righteousness? I don't know, but this is probably when they say they would not give him his real name. That means they were calling him by a title. And I suggest to you that title was Malachi Tzaddik.
Gosh, that's outstanding. Yeah, wow. Okay, let's go to the next slide. This is more of a detailed one here. There's another document called the Exhortation, which is quite fascinating, and I actually quite like it. It's it's not that long. In fact, anyway, it's a 10-minute read, but it's worth it. Another excerpt from the Dead Sea Scrolls, so I'll read it out. Listen now, all you who know righteousness, and consider the works of God, for he has dispute with all flesh, and will condemn all those who despise him. For when they were unfaithful and forsook him, he hid his face from Yasharel and his sanctuary, and delivered them up to the sword. But remembering the covenant of the forefathers, he left a remnant of Israel, and so did not deliver it up to be destroyed. And at the age of wrath, 390 years after he had given them up to the hand of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, he visited them and caused a plant of root to spring from Yasharel and Aaron to inherit his land and to prosper on the good things of the earth. And they perceived their iniquity and recognized that they were guilty men. Yet for 20 years they were like blind men groping for the way. And God observed their deeds, and they sought him with a whole heart. And he raised them a teacher of righteousness to guide them in the way of his heart. Okay, so I've done a little timeline there from, the writing of Jeremiah 31:31 was there saying, interesting this, that they were going out there for the new covenant. They quote Jeremiah 31:31 from the teacher of righteousness, teaching the precepts of a new covenant. All right, now that's obviously, we believe on the right hand side there, the renewed covenant obviously is sealed in the blood through Mashiach. Right, without his death, we'd all be doomed anyway. So he's the ultimate new covenant. But were some of the precepts being taught before that? I don't know, and I don't want to be heretical myself by talking like this, but I'm just saying, as we go through this, you'll see some moderated teaching in terms of their belief system.
I don't think it's heretical, John, for you to say that at all. I think that the Torah has been given to us over and over again, and Mashiach's revealment was something else, which we'll get to. But if you look at Ezekiel chapter 4, verse 5, he is commanded, lie on your side for 390 days. Each day is equal to a year.
Oh.
Right?
Click. Yes.
Wow.
There it is. And
wow.
So,
boom.
So here we have this being told. This is the covenant. He left a remnant to Israel, did not deliver it to be destroyed. And in the age of wrath, 390 years after, he had given them into the hand of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. Now, This is a discussion of the giving of Yasharel, not just the giving of Judah, but the giving of Yasharel.
Wow.
He visited them and caused a plant to spring root from Israel and Aharon to inherit his land. Yeah, so a teacher, a messenger of righteousness, Malachit Tzaddik, given in 176 BC, is 390 years later.
Yeah.
And he's going to come in and say, okay, what is he going to do? He's going to prepare the way.
Correct. Oh, interesting. Yes, he is. He is. Wow, that's deep. And so when you read the next bit, it says, "Hear now, all you who enter the covenant, and I'll unstop your ears concerning the ways of the wicked. God loves knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. He has set before him, and prudence and knowledge serve him. Patience and much forgiveness are with him towards those who turn from transgression, but power, might, and a great flaming wrath by the hand of all the angels of destruction towards those who depart from the way and abhor the precepts." Now it goes on and on and on, but those are some of the salient points, which those are in accord with other scriptures you might read in terms of sentiment, right? It's not like we're reading something from Mars here. It sounds similar, let's say. Okay.
Well, sure, you can find this everywhere. You can find it, like, for instance, the discussion of prudence is found in 4th Maccabees, the discussion of wisdom and understanding and prudence and knowledge, which result from wisdom and understanding, and that the prudent course is the appropriate course. And so, and once again, we have, I don't know how much the record, the actual empirical record of humankind has to testify, but patience and much forgiveness are with him to those who turn from transgression, but power, might, and great flaming wrath by the hands of the angel of the destruction from those who depart from the way. And this is the case. I mean, when you can see this in every social order on earth, and you can see it coming to the West now. We've had major transgression and the willingness to turn away from the precepts. And as a consequence, guess what? Power, might, great flaming wrath by the angels of destruction is coming.
It is. It's getting hot. It's getting hot. Next slide, yes, please. That would be great. So this is the covenant. I'll just run through it very quickly. Jeremiah 31:31. "Behold, the days come, says Yahweh, that I'll cut a new covenant with the house of Yasharel and with the house of Yehudah, not according to the covenant that I cut with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Mitzrayim, which the covenant they broke, although I was a husband to them, says Yahweh. But shall be a covenant that I'll cut with the house of Yasharel. After those days, Yahweh, I'll put my Torah in their inward parts and write it in their hearts, and I'll be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. And they shall teach no more every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, Know Yahweh, for they shall all know me, from the least of them up to the greatest of them, says Yahweh, for I'll forgive their iniquity and remember not their sin." Okay, so that's what the Essenes are quoting as their time of teaching. Okay, next slide. So again, look, you could say these out of context, not out of context, but again, I'm trying to get a feel, in the space of an hour to give a presentation or an hour and a half, it's hard to get a feel for people or the precepts and some of the thoughts, but there's a few excerpts here from the Dead Sea Scrolls that might show you that it's not from planet Mars, right? So on circumcision of the heart, right? Obviously in Romans 2:29 it talks about it, and elsewhere as well. But there's a fragment here that says, "Bless my soul." I've had to redact a lot of these. You can see the words, so I've shortened this a lot, obviously. "Bless my soul, the Lord, for all his marvels forever. He has circumcised the foreskin of my heart and has delivered them because of his kindness and has directed their feet towards the way. So, they talk about the way there. Again, this could be easily one of David's Psalms or whatever, on sacrifice, talking of the songs of David. So Yahweh gave him intelligent and brilliant spirit, and he wrote 3,600 psalms and 364 songs to sing before the altar for the daily perpetual sacrifice, for all the days of the year, and 52 songs for the Shabbat offerings, and 30 songs for the new moons, feast days, and the Day of Atonement. 4 songs to make music on behalf of those stricken by evil spirits, and there were 4,050 in total. All these he uttered through prophecy, which was given him before the Most High. So I thought it's kind of interesting section.
Yeah, especially since they only preserved 150 or 155.
Out of 4,000. I'm laughing, but it's horrible, right? It's like there must be others around. There's a few in the Dead Sea Scrolls that were released. There's about, probably 11 or something, but not many.
But also there's something interesting here too. Look, 52 songs for the Sabbath offerings. Once again, you see at the time of David, celebrating 52 weeks. Okay. Yes. And that's 52 7-day periods. And so this kind of debunks the whole lunar Sabbath ideology that's going on there, that it is not 48, which is what you get under the lunar Sabbath, because you only get 4 a month. It's 52. And it's because it's regular 7-day keeping.
Well, David and Solomon's the wisest man alive, right? So he would know, surely. So David and Solomon between them would know. I mean, if they got it wrong, then we're in a bad way.
Okay, all right. So the appeal to authority, John, it's actually a logical fallacy, but I'll go with it for the time being.
Okay, and on repentance. But all those who hold fast to these precepts, going and coming in accordance with the law, who heed the voice of the teacher and confess before God, saying, "Truly we have sinned. We are now fathers by walking counter to the precepts of the covenant. God will forgive them, and they shall see his salvation because they took refuge in his holy name."
Boom.
So this is in accord with the stuff we look at, and I haven't just been freaky here and picked out 3 things that seem to fit. Right? There's a lot more stuff, but we can't publish it. I'm not saying it's the gospel either, obviously, right? I'm not saying it's canonized either, but I'm trying to see if these people fit in line with what they call themselves, which is Yasharel. And could we consider that they could be part of the original tribes? Could we consider these could be the forerunners to James the Just and others? So that's what I'm trying to prove here, if we think that's possible.
Yeah, okay. I think so.
So now let's have a quick look at the society. There's 2 more scrolls. I'll be super quick on them. But again, this is to try and see, are these reasonable people? Would you want to spend time with them? Or these, nutters again? I say nutters, I shouldn't say that's not very holy, is it? But you know what I mean? Would you want to spend time with them? So this is the rule for the guardian of the camp or the village chief. Okay. So it says, he shall instruct the congregation of the works of God. He shall cause them to consider his mighty deeds and shall account all the happenings of eternity. He shall love them as a father loves his children, and he shall carry them in their distress like a shepherd his sheep. He shall loosen them from fetters which bond them in his congregation. That's fetters of the world, that is. It carries on, but I couldn't print everything. He shall examine every man entering his congregation with regard to his deeds, understanding, strength, ability, and possessions, and shall ascribe him his place according to his rank in the lot of light. No member of the covenant of God shall give or receive anything from the sons of dawn or the pit, except for payment. Likewise, he who marries, it goes on, and then advised, likewise he who divorces his wife, and the guardians shall instruct their sons and their daughters in the spirit of humility and loving kindness. So that's a very sort of parenting type, loving type, forgiveness type thing, right? Even through the divorce with the children. So that's kind of nice, really. And I didn't make that up either. That's just come out of the community rule. So that's that one. Next, Jess, that'd be great. So this is the last one of the scrolls, really. But this is the Masonic rule scroll. Again, I'm trying to get a feel for their society, the precepts and things. And so I'll read through this quickly. This is the rule for the congregation of Yasharel in the last days, when they shall join the community to walk according to the law of the sons of Zadok, the priests, and of all the men of their covenant who have turned aside from the way of the people. The men of his council will keep his covenant in the midst of the iniquity, offering expiation for the land. So keep his covenant in the midst of iniquity is where we are now, okay, trying to do things. But this is interesting for template for life. From his youth, they shall instruct him in the book of meditation and shall teach him the precepts of the covenant for 10 years. Okay, there's more to it than that, but boom, from 10 years onwards. And Dr. P, you mentioned the different phases of the Druids, right? And it was like 10 or 11 years was one of the big phases, wasn't it?
20 years. It was 20 years for an archdruid, 10 years to become a bard.
Okay.
And here, and you see something here, the book of meditation. How does Psalm 1 open up? I meditate on your Torah.
Day and night.
I meditate on your Torah, right? So the book of meditation, book of Psalms, right? I meditate on your Torah. Then what? You shall do this, and then you should be taught the precepts of the covenant. What does Yah call the covenant? The 10 Devarim.
Yes.
The 10 Devarim. That's what he calls the covenant. Now, John, you went through the 10 Devarim class. Is there 10 years worth of study available in studying the precepts?
Easily. You know, when you put scenarios in there and everything else, it gets crazy, right? But there is. And so what a way this is. And so I thought this was quite enlightening for me, thinking, well, you know, I remember going to, you know, I was in the Catholic Church growing up. I remember at 10 or 12 thinking, you know, I didn't like to say it, but in my mind I think I'm getting a bit bored now, but I've heard the same things over and over again. Surely we can let's do something fresh and new. But there isn't. So by the time you're 16, you're thinking, please get me out of here. Just because you're being talked at. And that's horrible, right? It's horrible. It sounds sacrilegious, but, you know, you got the sense of honor, duty, and, you know, obviously you get spirit filled from certain occasions, but from an IP perspective, you get hit over the head with a block hammer. But whereas this actually shows you, you know, growth and graduation through life, which is what I like. So the next one, it says, at the age of 20 years, he shall be enrolled, that he may enter upon the allotted duties in the midst of the family and be joined to the holy congregation. He shall not approach a woman to know her by lying with her before he's fully 20 years old, when he shall know good and evil. And shall be allowed to assist in the hearing of judgments.
Yeah, that's a very good idea. And in fact, 20 years old is even, and that's just like barely crossing the threshold. Do you still really know? You know, like, for instance, what most young people don't understand is that when you enter into this kind of interaction between male and female, you cross into adulthood, and you cross into adulthood with its corresponding results. So in other words, you know, all of a sudden you reach a point where, gee, somebody can get pregnant, and which is going to create a lifetime of responsibility. That's one thing. Another thing that happens is that there is, once you have entered into an adult relationship, when that relationship ends, should it end, it has adult consequences. You suffer grief, tragedy, loss, mourning, blah, 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 on and on and on it goes at a very, very high level. It is not something for a teenager to be engaged in.
Yeah,
destroys teenagers. And so this is why this is an important, and of course, 20 years is provided in Exodus, in Numbers, in the book of Numbers, telling you when you begin to count somebody as an adult. 20, not 18, not 19, not 21, 20 years old. Okay.
Yeah, 100%. So, and then at the age of 25 years, he may take his place in the foundations, i.e. the officials of the holy congregation. At the age of 30 years, he may approach participate in lawsuits and judgments, and may take his place among the chiefs of the thousands of Yasharel, under the authority of the sons of Aaron and the priests. He may perform the tasks of the brethren in accordance with with his understanding and perfection of his way, according to whether his great or little, so shall one man be honoured more than another. Okay, so again, graduation, he has seniority at 30 years. You know, even in industry, you know, when I coach people, I talk to them. You know, it's 30 to 35. You become the team lead. You start to become a middle manager. You start to come to that point where you've got enough about you that you've had some life experience behind you where you can take some kind of control. And that's kind of what I'm seeing here. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
interesting. And then the sons of Levi shall hold office, each in his place, under the authority of the sons of Aaron. They shall cause the congregation to go home, to go and come, each man to his rank, under the direction of the heads of the family of the congregation, the leaders, the judges, the officers, according to the number. So it's a very structured society. It's interesting that Dr. P says the sons of Levi shall hold office under the authority of the sons of Aaron. And what's the difference there? So I would be a bit kind of...
Yeah, well, there's, again, when you talk about the sons of Aaron, this is a particular aspect, because remember, Aaron was just one camp of the sons of Levi.
Mm.
And I believe Aaron came under the sons of Kohath, and because Levi had 3 sons and Kohath was one, and Aaron sprung from the sons of Kohath. And then the sons of Aharon would become the central priesthood. If you remember, when they were in the wilderness, Moshe instructed them, every tribe is to put together a staff and put the name of your tribe on the staff. And so all the 12 tribes did. But Levi, no, he was not to put Levi on the staff, but to put Aharon on the staff. So it was Aaron's staff that was the staff that guided the house of Levi. So there are 2 complete branches of Levite families that were not in the priesthood of Aharon. And so these Levites were to hold office. And then the sons of Aharon would be a different story. And and these are going to be the leaders, judges, officers, according to their number.
Yeah. But it's a structured society. It looks like they've got things in hand and control. They know what they're doing. This is a civilized, authoritative, religious, but with high IP. Right? These guys are not stupid. They've got as much structure as you'd want in a community. Okay, to give justice, law, hierarchy, responsibility, etc. Right. So that's what I'm trying to put out here. This isn't some kind of tribe out there that's just gone off the ranch, right? Doing whatever. It's a flat hierarchy. Deciding, go vegetarian, go hippie, not wash, whatever. I'm not whatever.
Yeah.
Right? Again,
who comes back with an eagle's egg becomes the king, and on and on. It's none of that nonsense.
Exactly, and this is what I'm trying to dispel. We need to just go through to first sources here, not through third-hand books and stuff. If you spin to the next slide, Jess. At this point, we split to Philo now. So he's our eyewitness. Right? He's the guy that I forget 20 or 30 BC up to about 40 AD or whatever. So he went to visit these guys. So he talks to them about his interviews with them. All right. So we're going to look at some of their doctrines and beliefs now. The next 3 slides. Okay. So this is Philo talking. So no copyright on this one as such. So we're happy with that. So, moreover, Palestine and Syria are not barren of extremely exemplary wisdom and virtue. In the countries, there's no small portion of the most popular nation of the Jews. There's a portion of those people called Essenes. Now, because it's a village people, we know that we're not talking Essenes particularly, but the Damascus document, and I'm saying the Nasaraeans. Okay, in number, something no more than 4,000, in my opinion. Now, 4,000 isn't a lot, you've got to say. Who derive their name from the piety, though not according to the accurate form for the Greek language. Okay. Because they are above all especially devoted to the service of God, not sacrificing living animals, but studying rather to preserve their own minds in a state of holiness and purity.
Boom, huge.
Right. So that's first-hand witness. He's Alexandria. He's not even. He's gone to the Levant to go to see his brethren to have a look, and he's writing down what he sees. So this is. He's got no reason to sway things this way, that way, the other way. He just writes what he sees as a reporter. All right. So these men, in the first place, live in villages avoiding all cities on account that the habitual lawlessness of those who inhabit them. Again, this is Hellenism. We had the all sorts of different things going on there with the gymnasiums and stuff. Anyway, knowing that such a moral disease is contracted from associations from wicked men, just as real disease might be from unhealthy atmospheres, and this would be of deadly effect on the souls. So he's saying, and I think the same thing happens when you put the TV on. You let the world into your lounge, and the same thing happens, right? You've got to pollute your soul if you're not careful. Anyway, of these men, some cultivating the earth and some others devoting themselves to those arts which are the result of peace, benefit both themselves and from those who come into contact with them, not storing up treasures of silver and gold, nor acquiring vast sections of land out of the desire of ample revenues, but providing all things which are requisite for the natural purposes of life. For they alone of all men have become poor. So it's like the Ebionites later on, right? Ebionite means poor, and so they will become the Ebionites later on, I'm sure. And destitute by deliberate action. So they haven't been made it, they've done it by deliberate action, rather than by any deficiency of good fortune, but the nevertheless accounted very rich, judging contentment and frugality to be in great abundance, as in truth they are.
There you go. And here is that teaching. And of course, this is consistent with other testimony of people looking at James the Just, Yaakov, the brother of Mashiach, well, the half-brother, and here James the Just running over a group of people which appeared impoverished. And
yes.
so here you see a group of people who are engaged in what you would call physical disciplines. In other words, they weren't eating meat. They were disciplining themselves away from eating meat because they were not going to sacrifice living animals, but rather they spent their time studying to understand righteousness and purity and developing a society that was pushing towards righteousness and purity by deliberate action.
Exactly.
And so in that so it's very difficult so you could describe these Essenes or Ebionites as quote unquote the meek. Very difficult to enslave the meek. If you don't do what we say, we're going to take away your stuff. What stuff? We're not going to let you have McDonald's hamburgers anymore. So what? I don't eat meat. We're gonna do this to you. We're gonna do that to you. Well, you can't. We've already disciplined ourselves away from that stuff. So what are you talking about? And so you had people who had reduced their material expectation to nothing, right? And
Adrian.
and so it's very. I think it's very important here to see that. And this is something that, again, it's discussed in 4 Maccabees to some degree, which is that the society, reason is the disciplinarian of a social order. Reason can stop the affections from governing life, right? Now, of course, I like to, myself, I like the idea of reason accompanied with the blessings of the Ruach HaKodesh, that the Ruach can come along here and strengthen me and build me up and defend me and keep me and also give me the endurance to continue on. But the idea is that the Ruach is going to carry you in what reasonably you know to be discipline. And this is the whole critical aspect of any working social order. The social order has to be a disciplined society. In other words, what causes a social order to function is the ability to say no. Not, we need to have diversity, equity, and inclusion to everybody who wants to say yes to everything possible. So are we going to have inclusion for the serial rapist? Are we going to include them in society? We're going to make room for them to diversify and to have equitable standing for the somebody who engages in forcible serial rape? Are we? Is that just an orientation? No, of course it isn't. There is a point where society says no. And the reasonable society says no at a very high level. And by saying no at a very high level, that society becomes the head and not the tail. It becomes the creditor and not the debtor. It moves forward in its discipline, And where do you think the word discipline comes from? Disciple. Disciple, right? And so those who are disciples, and in this case, you were talking about James, and James the Just and these Essenes and Ebionites were criticized for a couple of reasons, right? Paul was railing on them about the ones who were celibate and not getting married. Yeah, you should do like me and be celibate, except, those people can't handle that, so get married, right? This is Paul's teaching, and he's railing on the vegetarians. Don't be like those Ebionites only being vegetarians. They're weak people, he says about that, right? But in the meantime, you can see that this particular group, which was I think they were a monastic order, and we would see many monasteries throughout the next 2 millennium spring up in Europe that were following this kinds of ideology, right? When you get to a monastery, you're living this kind of life. By deliberate action, you're living in, deficiency of good fortune. This is what was happening. And these monasteries were engaged in this kind of behavior, and they would build. You think about some of these monasteries that were built. Hey, let's go up here to the top of that little island that's absolutely impassable, that has no possible way you can get up there, and let's build a stone monastery up there. You guys up to that? Yeah, okay. So let's start hauling the rocks now. I mean, when you look at like Montserrat, for instance, but there's places in Switzerland, there's a monastery at 11,500 feet, right? There are monasteries on islands that you can only get there 1 hour a day, and you have to walk out there barefoot. And yet they hauled rocks out there until they could build these huge monasteries. Okay,
or carve them into a mountain or something. It's wild.
Yeah, carve them into a mountain in these most inaccessible places. These absolutely crazy monasteries. But this gives you an idea that it was this kind of practice that caused those monasteries to spring up. And those monasteries, when you think about it, you're looking at Switzerland. Is it possible to live up there? No, that's all mountains and it's cold and you can't do it. And so a bunch of monks goes, well, here, show us the most inhospitable place you can find. Well, it's right there. Good. We'll put a monastery up there and we'll live up there. And then once they did that, well, I guess it is. If they can do it, we can live up here. Let's put a village up there. Right?
Yeah. That's
well, and it's interesting, morality and reason and laws, like laws that are Yah prescribed, are freedom, and that's the inversion. And you see this, lawlessness for a long while, but that's the inversion, is do what you will is freedom in this day and age, like accepting of all these different things. But that's a prison, and our community knows that. We know that living in his ways is true freedom, right? And he says that in scripture. He's like, I present you life and death. He brought us out of bondage. He didn't put us back into a prison after he brought us out of bondage. And, reason is part of that freedom. It's a gift from Yah. We're the only species on the planet that really has reason to the level that we do. And that is a direct gift from Yah, so that we can live in the freedom that is, his ways, the way that he appointed us to walk is freedom. And we know that. And, it's an ills of our modern era that we've embraced the opposite of that. But it's nothing new under the sun. And so even before the time of the Messiah, lawlessness has been a prison ever since Adam and Eve left the garden, right? And so we left paradise and kind of got put into this prison. But it's just interesting that it's kind of, the modern era really looks down on reason and structure, and they would call it a traditional way of looking at things through the family unit, through morality, through the absolutisms of things, right? So everything's relative, is the big theory these days. But some of the, like you mentioned, you see this every day, sadly, in Europe, where they're sort of like trying to twist rape into this like discussion. Oh, they don't know any better, or it's like a cultural thing. That's an absolute, that is wrong. Same thing with pedophilia. They're trying to twist these things into relative terms, and it's this, and if they don't act on it, it's that, and this and that, and no, there's an absolute morality there that it is wrong, and that's freedom. That in of itself is freedom. The instructions that the Most High left to mankind is freedom, and obviously the modern era perverts that to the opposite.
Yeah. Inverse. Everything's upside down, isn't it?
Isaiah, woe to them that call bitter sweet and sweet bitter.
Don't. That's where we are, isn't it? Hey, Jess, next slide, please. That'd be great. So, okay, so I'll spin on quickly. Among those men, you'll find no makers of arrows, javelins, swords, helmets, breastplates, shields, no maker of arms or multi-engines, no one in short attending to any employment whatsoever connected with war, or even any of those that occupation, even in peace, which are easily perverted to wicked purposes. For they are utterly ignorant of all business and all commercial dealings, and of all sea trade, but they repudiate and keep aloof from everything which can possibly afford to be inducement to covetousness. So these guys aren't businessmen, right? Not seamen, and they don't, if they do sports, they don't throw the javelin. But obviously, they don't do anything to do with war. So completely passive. Okay, next is there's not a single slave among them, but they are all free, aiding one another in reciprocal interchange of services. They condemn the owner of slaves not only as unjust as much as they corrupt the very principles of equality, but likewise as impious because they annul the ordinances of the nature which created them all equally and brought them up like mother, as if they were all legitimate brethren, not in name only, but in reality and truth. But in their view, this natural relationship of all men to one another has been thrown into disorder by scheming covetousness, continually wishing to surpass others in good fortune, which has therefore endangered alienation instead of affection and hatred instead of friendship. So but that, again, that's slaves are in Torah, aren't they? In terms of bond servants, etc., is talked about. So this is a moderation on that as well, showing that slavery was not in that camp.
Well, it's an interesting take on the Messiah's teaching to cut off, your arm if it leads you into hell, right? And so these people felt that the temptation of business, the temptation of a military-industrial complex, were too great for their society that they'd rather maim themselves rather than enter into hell whole, which is a great example for our leaders today. Obviously, that cat's out of the bag a bit. But these are clearly business is good and capitalism is good and cronyism is bad. So if your whole goal is greed and stacking coins in a mountain like a dragon, then that's obviously a perversion of the goodness that can come from economy. And it's interesting that they would rather kind of cut themselves off completely from that in order to completely remove that temptation.
But it's hard, right? Because how do you build discipline without experience? And so if you're like, where in the world, right? And I'm thinking, well, why am I here at this time in the world? You have to read the world's history, and we see so much stuff coming on TV. You go into the streets, you can't look at the news, etc. Got the war on the front. You're thinking, gosh, am I a vessel of light, or what difference can I make? You're thinking to yourself, and obviously you pray whatever. But then you think, well, because we're in here, we are going through tribulation in our own lives, and we're being refined. And by having touching darkness and touching other things, we are able to discipline ourselves. So if you've been locked away like a monk, you might have a beautiful pious life and be high spiritual, but at the end of it, you might only be it might be spiritually fuller, but less experienced. So it's kind of hard, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it's leading by example, right? We're supposed to be lights, and you don't put a lit menorah underneath the table, right? So you're supposed to be a light on a hill, and you have to lead by example. And to your point, you can't lead in these endeavors if you're ignorant of them. You can't lead in business if you're ignorant of business. War maybe is a slightly different subject, but we see throughout all the Old Testament, or even Messiah's going to come back and make war. So it's not a light thing. Like it's not a light thing, but obviously even war has its place in the kingdom due to the nature of our fallen state of man. And so if you're not versed in them, then you're not able to be that light and stand for his kingdom against people who aren't going to within that same endeavor.
Yeah. Okay, Dr. P.
So I think it's a really good point. And I think when you look at the Gospels, and again, when we look at the practice of the Nazareans, this is a practice that in part is a response to the excesses of Judaism and the excesses of the practice of the Herodians and so on and so forth. And you can see that this group is walking away from all of it, saying, we're not doing any of that. And we're certainly not going to be part of this Bar Kokhba revolt that's going to take place in this riot against the Romans. And that's just not us, right? And so the idea of this pious order of reluctance, if you will, of this discipline of really non-materialism. Okay. And when you read the community rules, you find out it was very much communal collective living in the way that they did things. And even that collectivism would have a cost. So when you read Acts chapter 2, for instance, Stalin used to have a saying, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Where did he get that? Did he get that from Karl Marx? Did he get that from Friedrich Engels? From Vladimir Lenin? Where did he get that? He got it from the Book of Acts. He got it from the Book of Acts, and because they were practicing under Kefa, they were practicing communism. They were practicing a collectivism that was everybody give all your property to us, we'll put it into the kitty. And then the one couple that withheld the commission both dropped dead, right? But what you don't see after that is, and you don't see this after the death of James the Just either, you don't see that collectivism following in that methodology. In other words, in the faith, you don't see that collectivism following anymore. You don't see it being practiced at Antioch. It's certainly not enshrined in Constantinople. You don't see it practiced in the south of France. You don't see it practiced even in Britain. This idea of this collective commune kind of living, it doesn't happen. And part of the reason it doesn't is because it is, when you say, okay, we're not going to have any employment connected with war. We're not going to do any business. Okay, well then how are you going to eat? Well, we're just going to plant and eat the vegetables we have. Okay, well that's possible to some degree. But they had a universal basic income under the community rules. They had a UBI. That you had to be there 2 years before you could join the community. Then once you join the community, you would share in the UBI, the universal basic income. Well, all of these communities perished. And they ultimately perished. And they didn't perish. I don't believe they perished because at the point of the sword. They perished because of the economic failure of the community. And, ultimately, Peter walked out of whatever community he had going there in Jerusalem, and he and John Mark ended up in Cairo. And there's absolutely, they called it Fortress Babylon, but Second Peter identifies it as Babylon, but it was Cairo, an outskirt of Cairo. And when they got there, you don't see any record inside the Egyptian record of this collectivism coming into Egypt, because they recognized this practice was not going to happen. It had its own failure date. It had its own expiration date. Like, for instance, the celibate community. The celibate community in the Essenes has 1 generation to live. That's it.
Yeah.
And it's done, And we had the same problem when we first launched the Sefer. People said, you should give that away. Freely you have been given, freely you shall, freely you shall receive, freely you shall give. Well, first of all, it wasn't freely we had received. We had to work very, very hard to get enough money to put together the first printing. And then secondly, if we had done that, there wouldn't have been a second printing. That would have been it. That would have been the end of the discussion. And so we had to properly manage our resources and steward our resources to continue to produce the text. And maybe in 200 years, people would have gone back and said, oh, look, it's like the Gutenberg Bible. They only produced this X number of those, and they had no effect for the next 150 years, But that wasn't the point. The point was to put Scripture in as many hands as possible. So, and you have to keep in mind that when we look at any of these teachings that are coming forth out of the Nazareans, the Essenes, and so forth, this is all overruled by the teaching of Mashiach, who said, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. Yes, blessed are the meek, they will inherit the earth. And this is true. If you're just a person who is humbly farming on a gentleman's farm, warring armies are going to pass you by. They really don't care about you. You're not a soldier, you're just a farmer. We'll just come back and steal your eggs here 2 weeks from now when we stole your chicken, right? And this is the kind of thing that kind of goes on, blessed are the meek. But you have to keep in mind, too, that there are many other things that we're called to, right? To being peacemakers, to being all of these other things. And that there is really nothing condemning a person obtaining wealth, but it is when you love the money, right? You love money more than you love Mashiach, well, then you've got an idol. And also, and Mashiach also makes the point, too, that once you obtain a substantial amount of wealth, it's very difficult for you to find the kingdom of heaven, because all you can think about is that wealth.
Yep. But you got to think, I think it's in Joshua. What was Jubilees? I think it's Joshua. When he tests Abraham 10 times, and by the time his wife dies, it said Abraham's been. This is the 10th time we tested Abraham. We tested through his country, and one of them was through wealth. Mm-hmm. So he's been poor, he's been rich, he's left his land, he's left his wife, blah blah blah, through and circumcision was one of them as well. But so you're tested through life, and that's the discipline you bring, isn't it? By experience and by knowing these things. And if you haven't tried any of these things, then you can't say that you've overcome them, right? So
yeah.
I think that, and it's interesting. It's like a pendulum, and I do this personally. I have to do this personally due to my personality, which is, in order to get away from something, I have to completely cut it out. I'm not great at phasing things out. Like, I can't just slowly wean myself off something. I have to remove from the house. I have to go completely hard in its removal from my life. And not that I want to reintroduce it at some point, but in order to change my habit, I have to completely cut it out. And you might be seeing that here, right? These people might have come from that, whether it's ancient Judaism and the practices of the Maccabees and paganism and these things. They could be making a decision as a community for them at that time that in order to get away from these, it could be a generational thing. In order to sort of set up the next generation to be able to properly handle and walk in the world, let's completely cut these things out that we did and were temptations for us in order to reestablish a relationship with them moving forward. So
it's like where we are now, though, isn't it? That's exactly where we are now.
Yeah, really. I mean, when you think about the excesses of the Maccabees trying to create Judaism and the writing down of the second law, the Mishnah, and the oral law and the rise of rabbis and so on and so forth, as they just started to layer on the bureaucracy. These guys are like, no, we're going the opposite direction. We're peeling out and going that way. We're not following that stuff at all. We're going over here. And so you can see that really, when you think about it, the fact that the Maccabees were willing to undertake this creation of Judaism on the face of the Torah gave these Nazareans also the right to abandon the temple sacrifice, to move away from, this business of which we be at the temple with offerings and on and on. They moved away from all of that. They moved away from that. There's no temple sacrifice, no time at the temple. There's no Levite priests doing the temple services. Right?
Yeah,
they're doing something different.
Yeah. So here, let me spin on. We're almost there now. So sorry, Jess, go back. Just finish that slide. Thank you. 81. Now, these laws, they're taught at other times, indeed, but most especially on the seventh day. The seventh day is accounted sacred, on which they abstain from all other work and forget the sacred places, which they're called synagogues. So they sit according to their age in classes. The younger sit below the elder and listening with eager attention. Then one indeed takes up to the books and reads them, and another of the men of the greatest experience comes forward and explains what is not very intelligible. For a great many precepts are delivered by enigmatic modes of expression and allegorically, as an old-fashioned was. Thus the people are taught piety, holiness, justice, economy, the science of regulating the state, and the knowledge of such things as naturally good, bad, or indifferent, and to choose what is right, to avoid what is wrong, using a threefold variety of definitions, rules, and criteria, namely the love of God, the love of virtue, and the love of mankind. Okay, so that seems in order. Sorry, just next slide. That'd be great. Thank you. We're almost there now. Accordingly, they present a multitude of proofs to the love of God, and they continued uninterrupted purity throughout the whole of life, of careful avoidance of oaths and of falsehood, restricted adherence to the principles of looking on the deity as the cause of everything which is good and nothing which is evil. They also furnish us with many proofs of love of virtue, such as abstinence from all covetousness of money, ambition, and indulgence of pleasures, temperance, endurance, and also moderation, simplicity, good temper, absence of pride, obedience to the laws, steadiness, and everything of its kind. Lastly, they bring forward as proofs of the love of mankind, goodwill, equality beyond the power of description, fellowship, about which is not unreasonable to say a few words.
Look at these workers. It's just so funny, right? I mean, obviously we are aware of that, but establishing proof of your love is incredibly scriptural. I mean, that's the only way scripture defines love is through the behavior that you have towards Elohim and towards mankind. And, again, I'm preaching to the choir here. We all know this, but this is something that our community gets railed on is, we're putting works above this and that, and we don't have faith because we have works, and you works-based salvation and all this nonsense. And clearly, Dr. P was talking about, this was the faith established before 330 AD in the Council of Nicaea. They're in tandem. They are a singular unit. Your faith and your works they go hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other, which James literally says in Scripture. Because how else do you prove? You can't say, "Oh, Yah knows my heart," and Jeremiah, he says, "The heart is wicked above all things." He does know your heart, but what you do. And Messiah says this, what comes out of your mouth defiles you. And in another way, what you do defiles you. And in the same context, if what you do defiles you, what you do can prove your holiness, can prove that you are part of the Kodeshim, can prove your heart, that you love Yah and you love your neighbor, you love mankind. And this is a powerful confirmation of that, right? These are powerful confirmations for us that we have the right idea of what it means to be Yah's child. We have the right idea of what it means to be the sheep that hear the Messiah's voice and follow him. And, people love quoting, those who believe on me have eternal life. Well, how do you know that you believe in the Messiah? How do you know? You can't, and let's just say you can't use the argument that he knows your heart. How do you know? What proof, I love that word. What proof do you have that you believe in the Messiah other than just saying it, right? And again, the Messiah, they worship me with their lips, yet their hearts are far from me. So you can't just worship him with your lips. He says this. James says, even the demons believe and they cower. And so, it's not enough to just, give lip service. Oh, I love my neighbor because I don't egg his house. Oh, I love my neighbor because I don't actively obstruct his life in some way. Well, that's not loving him. I love my neighbor because I return his dog. I love my neighbor because I bring him lasagna when he's sick, or I bring him, cookies when he moves in. I'm just, small examples of modern benevolence towards a neighbor. But these proves, this shows, as Dr. P said, this shows what was important to the early church, what was important to the early ecclesia, the early assembly, which was making sure that as a community they fostered these works, these behaviors, that kept them close to Yah and his ways. And I just absolutely love that.
This is something else too. We were talking about Eisenman earlier. Eisenman deals with this very issue, talking about the distinction between Paul and James. That James writes, faith without works is dead. And Paul was teaching something radical. Now, Eisenman proposes something very radical. You recall in the book of Acts, there were a group of men that said, "We will not eat or drink until Paul is dead." You remember this?
Yes, I remember this. Yeah.
And then Paul flees from Jerusalem and he goes up to Caesarea and he appeals to Caesar as a Roman citizen. Now, how was it that he was Roman, right? Because guess what? He was Herodian. That's how he was a Roman, right? When he was calling himself the house of Benjamin, he was telling people, "I'm Herodian," right? Because that's how they were identifying themselves, as the house of Benjamin. So here you see Paul saying, and then what happens in the book of Acts? Oh, the only reason they're here to kill me is because I believe in the resurrection. And he starts up this civil war. He does a classic Paul tactic, incites a riot between the Sadducees and the Pharisees.
On the resurrection.
The only reason they're against me is because I believe in the resurrection. It's like me getting accused of beating somebody up at Sukkot. And then when I come to trial, I say, the only reason they're picking on me is because I follow a solely lunar calendar. Right? And let's get the calendar argument going instead of talking about what happened. And the truth is that, Paul was highly critical of these guys, and he was highly critical of James the just, Yaakov the just, right? The brother of Mashiach. And you can see the kind of differences that were going on. So you could say, all right, well, look, the difference in ministry has to do with the fact that Paul was going to the so-called Goyim, the Gentiles, and the Essenes were claiming a heritage to the house of Yasharel. And so Paul is saying, your race means nothing. Your circumcision means nothing, said Paul, who was circumcised, right? But it also tells you that if Paul was circumcised and he was saying that the circumcision meant nothing, it sounds to me like he was resentful of his circumcision, which means that he was circumcised by force, or he was part of a community that was circumcised by force, right? And so this is part of it. But at any rate, this whole business of faith without works is dead is really central to what goes on in the Christian church. Now, I mean, just between us guys here and Jesse included, hope you don't take umbrage to that, Jesse.
Honorary.
But you know, the Christian church right now has been really, really, really greatly misled by really pretty bad translations. You know, I mean, when you're talking about Westcott and Hort derivative translations with all of their redacting and all of their clipping, man, it is hard to get a true message. And the churches have then been exploited. You know, most of the churches in the United States were compromised in 1954 when LBJ, who would later bring us the Vietnam War in his self-dealing, created the 501c3. The 501c3 tax-deductible church. You can have a tax deduction, which they were already tax-deductible. But under 501c3, if you claim that, which you didn't need to because you were already tax-deductible, but if you did claim that, well, then you can no longer engage in political speech. Right? You're cut off. You have to shut your mouth, or we'll pull your 501c3. Right? So this wasn't. This was no longer a benefit to the church. It was a registration and license that was given to the church for behavior they already had freely. But every single Christian church in the United States, with very, very few exceptions, is a 501c3. So they're all paying umbrage to the state. Their God is really the state. It is not Yah. Their scriptures have been redacted and carved up all over the floor. And they're pulling up these redacted forms of scripture and saying, this is the inerrant word of God. That's been redacted by Masons, been redacted by atheists, been redacted by compromise agents. And so they come up and say, this is the inerrant word of God. And then they're taught lawlessness from the pulpit. And they're not only taught lawlessness from the pulpit, they're taught covetousness from the pulpit.
Yeah.
You should have a bigger house. You should have a boat. You should have a this. You should have a that. You need this, that, blah, blah, blah. On and on and on it goes, with covetousness being taught and promiscuity being taught and sin being taught and iniquity being taught. And, oh, we're okay because we cast out demons and have healings in here. Right?
And like, not even being told to pray for it, which I think even is much worse.
Yeah.
Like pray for a boat, pray for a bigger house. You know, like spend your time talking to Yah, asking for material things is like, that's bad.
And if you're under 6 years old, pray for candy.
Yeah, which my son does actually. When we say grace, he says thank you for candy.
Well, he's not 20 yet, so we forgive him.
Yeah, exactly. And he's funny because he really likes the concept of New Jerusalem, and so he's like, "Daddy, when we get to New Jerusalem, is there going to be a cotton candy machine?" And I'm like, you're gonna have to ask. Yeah, probably if you want. I don't know, man. Yeah, it's fun, and it's like celebrated. It's not even. It's like it takes it to a really gross degree where it's like celebrated, right? And I do see a decent pushback recently. From what I can maybe see through social media on these types of things from a certain sect of Christianity. So hopefully they're sort of right the ship a little bit, but it's like, if your church is flying pride flags, that's subversion to a very intense level. They're not even saying it's kind of okay. They're like celebrating it. They're promoting it. They're, saying it's good. And, it's wild because anyone who picks up the scripture, and that's not a Old Testament laws done away with. Paul says it. Yeah, the Messiah says it. So if you're a Pauline, kind of guy, these things should not be tolerated in our modern churches. And it's sad. It's one thing to have love for one another, and it's one thing to not push someone away who's in sin. I mean, we clearly see that as an example of something we shouldn't do. They might have to clean up their act a little bit to, kind of. Acts 15 and things specifically, like, quit doing some of these really, really bad stuff, and, you'll be able to drop the rest of the sin along the way. But yeah, it's a sad state. And I think that's why you also saw, we've seen this phenomenon for a very long time, the decline of attendance of religious institutions in the Western world, is at an all-time low. It's absolutely plummeted. And that's sad. I mean, it's one thing for us to know like the depth of the truth. It's a whole other thing for people to just like completely walk away from Yah in whatever way they might know him, right? It's a really sad state.
But we're in a sad state of generational community where a lot of the old people who would be there and be the pillars of the church, basically during COVID, certainly in the UK, a lot of them died off. My mum's one of the, she's 89 this year, and she goes to 2 churches, but she's one of a few. But people with a nice heart are there. Anybody that just went, well, half the other people died off, unfortunately, it was the age group. And then the young people just, it's not a priority in life. The world's got its whole tax thing going, work thing, buy more, get your second car, do whatever thing going on, or just survive in this country. There's so many homeless people. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, so, and a couple of things, Drew, on the rainbow flag appearing in churches. For me, this is a very clear symbol that the church has been overtaken by Talmudism. See, that 6-colored flag for me is very, very obvious and very clear. The Talmud is the only document on earth that declares 6 sexualities. Okay? Scripture says there's 2, male and female, he created them. The Talmud claims there's 6. So when you see that 6-colored flag, that is ideologically Talmudism. And so when the church puts up the 6-colored flag, they're proclaiming that the Talmud has dominance over the Talmudic thinking has dominance over Christian thinking. That's what's being said. Now, you can try to say, oh, well, it's just about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well, it isn't. It is about diversity and equity and inclusion, and what you've included is the Talmud, and the Talmud now has sway over your congregation. That's what is controlling. That's controlling doctrine. And when you see the flag flying in place of a state flag or a county flag or a city flag, that tells you that the Talmud has dominance over the political ideology of that community. Instead of it being a constitutional republic or sovereign to the British crown, it's sovereign to the Talmud and Talmud theology. See, that's what that flag means. Now, when you this idea of, look up here, it says, proofs of a love of virtue, abstinence from all covetousness of money, from ambition. Now, ambition, Jeff Beck used to have a song, he's just ambitious, right? He's not a bad man, he's just ambitious. While he's trotting all over people, stepping all over them, walking on his close friends, anything he could do to lift him, standing on the neck of his brother to lift himself up, right? That's quite often found in ambition, right? And when somebody makes that conclusion, when somebody decides, I really want to exalt my ministry, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to attack Dr. P and call him all kinds of names in a video. So I can lift myself up, right? That's ambition. And it's ambition at the expense of someone else. I got to step on somebody else's neck to push myself up into the forefront, right? From indulgence in pleasures. Now, when you talk about indulgence in pleasures, this is the difficulty. I really like those Lay's potato chips, which I do, right? Even though they're loaded with MSG and everything else. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have a bag. I'll just have a bag of potato chips. I'll just eat some of them. Then pretty soon it's a bag a day. Then pretty soon I'll just have a bag for lunch and I'll have a bag for dinner, right? Because you can't just eat just one. That's the truth, right? About Lay's potato chip. You can't just eat just one. Okay? Yeah, fantastic. I can't, So as soon as you engage in the indulgence of pleasure, so you say to yourself, well, I really would like to have, if I only had $100,000, I would be wealthy. When you get $100,000, if I only had $1 million, I'd be wealthy. When you get $1 million, if I only had $10 million, I'd be wealthy. Then pretty soon you got more money, like Bill Gates. He's got more money to live out 25 lifetimes. And he's still greedy for more because he's not satisfied, because he never can be satisfied. He never can be satisfied because he has an emotional hole in his soul that cannot be filled because he keeps seeking to satisfy the flesh instead of satisfying the ruach with temperance, endurance, moderation, simplicity, good temper. And then what? The absence of pride. You know what pride, what is the word for pride in Hebrew? Gay. Gey.
Really?
Yeah, that's the word for pride in Hebrew. Right?
Wow.
That's where the word comes from. Full of pride, right? And Paul calls that being proud about that particular habit is idolatry. It's idolatry. That's what Paul says it is. It's idolatry. Okay? Obedience to the laws. Okay, I mean, yes, I'm going to obey the law, but it has to be the law and not legality. Not just some statute that somebody created, but law. And law means what? Springs from time out of mind, is reasonable, and was the subject of consent when it was first enacted. That's a law. Steadiness, everything of that kind. Okay. Then the love of mankind means goodwill. Equality beyond the power of description. In other words, don't deny the kingdom of heaven to your brother that you think is ugly.
Mm-hmm.
And fellowship. Okay, all these things I think are very good standards for the believer, because the believer has to be in a situation where you moderate your life. You know, one of the great tools of happiness in life is contentedness. Be content with what Yah has given you. Be content with what Yah has given you. You know, and the way to be content, how do you practice being content? Give thanks with a grateful heart. Give thanks, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, that if we give thanks with a grateful heart for the things we do have, we learn contentedness with what Yah has done, with where Yah has placed us for such a time as this.
Exactly.
Right?
Predestined. We're all predestined to be here at such a time as this. So live with the suit you're in, your skin suit, and get on with life, right? With the tools you've got. That's the motto of that
There's
one.
another good saying that goes with that too, right? Live with the skin you have, right? Live in the suit of skin that you have. And also one that my mother-in-law used to teach: bloom where you are planted.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Right? Bloom where you are planted.
I like that.
All right, now number 85, I got to tell you, John, I'm in disagreement with this.
Yeah,
Because
if you're born again though, and you're full of the right with everybody else, I mean, you know, it depends, right? It depends what's causing things. If you've got, if all your teachers and your ministers and guardians and people in society of any age are all casting out demons. The less temptations. You're not eating fried food and having lots of additives and unpolluted stuff. Then maybe there's a bit more of a halfway house here, but it's not reality for our age, is it?
Well, it says that, and it says that it clarifies it almost kind of. The house is open to all those of the same convictions.
Yeah.
Which I think is probably, because I also kind of disagree with that. I mean, I think private property is very important, but
no, I think it's not possible because of our education system, our diet system, and our spiritual system at the minute. We're not in a state of completeness like that. I mean, maybe then it could have happened, right? But with Dr. P, he couldn't do it now without some, like even the Sukkot and the feast, as you said, keep a bit privacy to yourself, just so you keep a bit of yourself in reserve to keep your sanity outside of all circles and things. And I think that's a good policy.
And also, you have to keep in mind, too, that a lot of believers, and I think this is a very good perspective, the only thing we own at the permission of Yah. We don't own it against men. We own it at the permission of Yah. So if you have your own house, you have it because Yah provided it. And ultimately, it's Yah's place. Ultimately, it's Yah's wealth. It's Yah's food. Everything that you have belongs to him. And it's in your custody as a steward. But your stewardship is important as to how you handle it. Now, it's one thing for us to say it's a steward. It's one thing for you to make your stuff available to other people. But it's a completely different story for you to think that you have the right to take something that belongs to someone else and remove it to yourself as your possession. The Torah is very clear about that.
Yep.
That if you borrow something, you need to return it. There's no taking it and keeping it. Thou shalt not steal. And the thou shalt not steal is the same stuff you're not supposed to covet. Don't covet your neighbor's house. Well, it refers to it as your neighbor's house.
Right.
Not the collective house. And this is the thing, like I say, when we look at collectivism as practiced in Qumran, and the Nazareans, that this collectivism had its own failure built in. And this is something like Alexander Dugin, who's the great philosopher in Russia right now. He's spoken rather eloquently about these two contrasting things on the same continuum. At one side is individualism. At one side is collectivism. Both, when radicalized, lead to failure. Radical individualism leads to failure. Radical collectivism leads to failure. At somewhere in the middle, there is a collective need and an individual need. So, for instance, Blackstone argues in the Commentaries on English Law. He says it's nonsense to say some man you can develop a political philosophy based on the fact that some man is an island. Well, I mean, I agree with that, because there's no one who likes the idea of being an island. Very few people. I'm going to go be a hermit. I'm going to go live alone on this island, and I don't want to see anybody evermore. That is a very, very rare species, because typically what happens is people are willing to give up absolute freedom in order to live among one another. They give up I want to be able to walk around naked every day. Well, we don't want to see your nakedness, so put some clothes on. Oh, so I have to give up that when I'm around other people? Yes, you have to give that up when you're around other people. Oh, okay, so that's a liberty interest that goes away, right? And so you reduce the absolute liberty, and you sacrifice some of your absolute liberties in order to live among one another. Well, how far does that go? Now, when you get into a hardcore communist environment like they had in the Soviet Union, everyone lost everything. And when no one owns anything, or when everyone owns everything, no one owns anything. And as a consequence, you haven't seen environmental abuse until you see what that looks like. The Soviet Union did things to the environment that were absolutely unbelievable. Like, I'll give you an example. One of the largest freshwater lakes in the world was called the Aral Sea, A-R-A-L, the Aral Sea. It doesn't exist anymore. It does not exist at all. They drained every bit of water right on out of it, and it's completely gone. Arkhangelsk, it's a city in northern Russia on the Arctic Ocean. They parked all of their nuclear submarines and their nuclear vessels right in the harbor and let the nuclear reactors just rot right into the bay. That went on for 25 years before Putin finally cleared it up. It's finally cleaned up now. But it was the greatest nuclear dump in the entire world, poisoning the entire Arctic Ocean, right? They had the Mayak nuclear reactor. They took that nuclear waste and dumped it in the river. No filter, no nothing. Just throw it in the river. So now the whole Mayak River, all the riverbanks, they're all radioactive. It's all nuclear, all the way to the seashore, right? So if you want to see ecological damage, let the government own the property, and they'll show you how to destroy an ecology. Yeah. They'll completely destroy it because there's absolutely nothing to stop them. They're the end of the road. So this is why you talk about collective ownership, and you see that, and they tried this in Israel too. When Israel first formed, they formed the land ownership in most of Israel outside of the cities where they basically took Palestinian homes, was on the kibbutz. And the kibbutz was collective ownership. Well, there's still kibbutzes all over Israel, but the kibbutzes have almost entirely failed. Now they're in the hands of a single owner, and basically they have people living in the kibbutzes for free, but it's under the hands of a single owner. And they bring in workers and so on and so forth. What they went to from there was they went to what's called the yeshuv. And the yeshuv is individual landowners in a community. Like the city of Itamar, for instance, the village of Itamar. They went in there and they built all of those houses as a yeshuv. Everybody owns their own property, but they're in a single community. So there is a balance between hard collectivism and hard individualism, and there's somewhere in between. There are things that are best done collectively and things that are best done individually. But as it's written, no man is an island. No man is an island. But ultimately, to replace "thou shalt not steal" with "from each according to his ability, to each according to his need,"
Mm.
It's one thing if we're talking about Yah being the middleman. It's another thing when it's Joseph Stalin who's the middleman.
Right.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the New Jerusalem, right, is community, but people still have their own abodes to sleep in. I'm sure the streets to go down, there's trees you can eat things off, and there's community. But as you say, Yah's the middleman there. He's the owner, so he can have complete trust.
Mm.
Yeah. Trust in Yah,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah. So hey, look, I think we spun through these. The rest of them is one treasure among all, sick and not neglected. But if you go to the next slide, just quickly, it's the last song really of this presentation, which is basically an Essene hymn. So it's in the James, right? And this is one of those for Hippolytus back in about 140 AD, or whenever it was, when he's refuting, saying these guys are all, rubbish. We should kill them all. He brought this hymn up as one of the reasons why, saying it's Gnostic, etc. And it starts off with like the first section, primordial world, then the cycle of life and death, and no way out, then man born into this. So I'll read the last two sections, all right? So it says, "But Jesus said, Father, behold, a strife and illness across the earth wanders from your breath of wrath, but bitter chaos man seeks to shun and knows not how to pass it through. On this account, O Father, send me, bearing seals I shall descend. Through the ages whole I'll sweep, all mysteries I'll unravel, and forms of gods I'll show, and secrets of the saintly path, styled gnosis I'll impart." So just showing, again, it's just the style of, this is heretical because it didn't conform to the the rules as they wanted them at the time. But with an open mind, I can't, certainly in the last section, I can't see anything which should be. The gnosis is talking about there's knowledge, right? It's not the Gnostics as they talk about the two gods, the Old Testament and New Testament. It's more about style gnosis. It's basically, he'll show you knowledge in a style, in a format that you can understand of how creation works. And we might understand it one way, other planets or other solar systems or other beings or other species, a cat would understand differently to us, right? A fish would understand different to us. So, everything's made manifest to those who seek him. I don't know if you agree with that, but...
Yeah, I think that's a good point, John, that when you talk about gnosis, I mean, like, for instance, the word ignorant comes from gnosis, right? and it's the same thing with the so-called agnostic, which is actually a Gnostic without knowledge, a gnosis without knowledge. It is not agnostic, it's agnostic. You are a person without knowledge. And so it basically it's just a Greek word for gnosis. And when you see Mashiach did teach. He did teach child gnosis. He taught, how you understand the universe and how you understand the collections. And so these things are, and he did unveil all the mysteries I will unravel. And of course, these mysteries were unraveled, except they were unraveled primarily to Mashiach and not to any of the rest of us, because we're still trying to figure out what happened, right? But but I do think that when we talk about this thing, and again, a lot of these writings, when I'm not sure where this Essene hymn comes from, if this Hippolytus was out of the Nag Hammadi scrolls, or was this found later in the?
I don't know, but again, it's hard to get evidence that's old enough to be credible, from sources. And because he was trying to assassinate these guys, I figured that, well, maybe that's not a good place to start, but at least, he'll got some documents that's, were probably fairly relevant, in his hands. But, if you look through the theme of this presentation tonight, you've got to think that the Essenes are far from a lot of stuff you read in the papers or you pick up books for or Google on the internet. It's far more alike how you might expect Yasharel in the wilderness to have been, and to come out and to try and find the steps before Mashiach. This, as you mentioned earlier on, Dr. P, this is almost like a pre-Mashiach kind of awakening where they're trying to find the way, and they're doing everything they can. Yah sees that, helps them along, and then we get John the Baptist, Mashiach, etc., and then it's a new era, I think. But that's just my happy goggles on.
No, I think that's a good point. But one thing I want to point out concerning Joseph Arimathea.
Yes.
The Gildas record shows that he and his disciples were given 12 hides of land.
It does, and I've got a record of that somewhere as well. from 500 AD. And it says 12 hides of land on an island in the west. And Glastonbury, they say it could have been an island, but Anglesey could
It's
be an
Anglesey.
island. Yeah.
I believe it's Anglesey. I'll tell you, after being on Anglesey, yeah, it was Anglesey.
Yeah,
This was
I
his
believe that
place.
too.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, well, this is fantastic, John. I mean, and again, I think when we see this simplicity of it, and they were able to live this simplicity in the face of what was going on with the rise of Judaism, which was, John Hyrcanus moving people at the point of a sword into the practice they wanted them to do. And they were able to get out of that area, to move down into a discrete area and to live a discrete life. And the story is that this town Qumran, which we know as Damascus, that this town, this is the place that Paul went to persecute people. This is the place where John the Baptist was living because he wouldn't baptize far from there. And this is a place where Mashiach was staying before he went up to Bethany to lift Eleazar out of the grave. I mean, it's reasonable to assume that that's what's the case. And and if you recall, Mashiach said what? The birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head.
Mm.
I mean, James had just, even though he was Bishop of Jerusalem, stayed at Damascus. All right, so his base was headquartered there, even though it wasn't in the Jerusalem temple like 24/7. He was actually down in Qumran a lot of the time. So, that was center of all activities at that time. So yeah. So hey ho, there we go.
Okay, outstanding.
So
Very detailed. Thank you, John.
Yeah.
I think it's a really potent analogy or correlation between the ancient Israelites leaving Egypt and the Essenes leaving the garbage that had accumulated since then, right? And you could see that reflected in their complete abstinence of a lot of these things. A lot of these things that you don't scripturally need to be abstinent of, right? Like business, there's no Torah command that business is off limits and these kinds of things. There's also no Torah command that you can't enjoy a potato chip every once in a while. But you can see that they were driven to get back to the roots. And like I mentioned, I just recognize that behavior as one of the ways that I do that, right? When I feel like I have some leaven, I don't just keep a little bit around. I get rid of all of it and kind of start fresh. And then once I'm reestablished in new habits, maybe add a few things back in. And they would have needed to do that leaving Egypt, right? They had a lot of habits in Egypt that they would have needed to. You can almost probably rationalize that that's maybe why Yah was fairly strict, or Moses rather was fairly strict on them as they left in order to try to establish. You can kind of see this in things like, Stone a Drunken Son, where they were really adamant on establishing a successful future generations. And one of the ways that you can kind of do that is by completely cutting off the current generation from the things that tempt them, and then hoping that they pass on a better foundation to the next generations, in which case some of the temptations that are permitted can be reintroduced in a healthy manner. And ancient Egypt, leaving ancient Egypt, they would have needed to do that. And then, right before the advent of the Messiah, they clearly needed to, go through an intense de-leavening period. And leaven doesn't always mean sin, but go through an intense...
Drew, you've done it again. We're here again. You keep doing this tonight. Keep saying things, and you're exactly right. And it's paralleling now. Everything you're saying is paralleling now. It's like all the Hellenism before, all the abundance of everything before, the pollution, the next generation being in fear because they're not being taught properly, because they're not getting the commandments properly, because the lawless without knowing the lawless, etc. It's all now, isn't it?
Yeah, that we're going through the same thing, right? All of us did that. Yeah. All of us were like, when we realized the truth of the matter. And we were like, I got to get all this stuff out. And there's a lot of it that we don't reintroduce. But there's some of it that you realize you're like, okay, I finally kind of glean a bigger truth of the matter and these sorts of things as your walk progresses. Like a Sabbath is an example of that. At first you're like, should I turn on a light bulb? And you realize, as long as you're doing good and you're not literally engaging in your day job, for the most part, you're not a prisoner in your home. It's a beautiful day, made for man. And so you kind of you come to a deeper realization of how you can properly respect Yah's Sabbath in the way that he would have wanted mankind to do so. But yeah, it cycles, that we see these cycles throughout scripture, and we're definitely in another one of those cycles where a whole mass of people are waking up and just kind of like wanting to go into go like Enoch, Enoch was like, I'm out of here. You're like, you guys are the worst. I'm going into a mountain cave.
Wasn't it?
And he lets him do it. He's like, yeah, I'll let you do that for a little bit, but eventually he calls Enoch out of his seclusion, out of his abstinence from society, back into the world, because Yah needs people to stand for his kingdom. Otherwise, the only people standing are the people that you don't want standing, the people who are in power now, basically.
Well, I'll tell you, Drew, when you talk about that, it would do well. People got so attached to their fervency concerning their doctrine, particularly those people who are exposed to the Hegelian dialectic, which is the news media, which is doing nothing except fanning the fires of division. And they start taking on the partisanship of division. And the next thing you know, they're completely irrational. And, we have a country here in the United States that has a reputation for Salem witch trials, right? And this kind of mindset, which is, oh, well, that person's guilty, burn them right to the ground. And they all think they can laugh about it and tell jokes about it and have their pop culture celebration and on and on and on. Not recognizing what happened when Mashiach was crucified, which was, when you read the article volume or the letter of Pilate, you find out Pilate is saying it was a demon fest at the cross. These people were demon inhabited. They're up there howling and screaming and yelling and going on and on and on and on. Well, until Mashiach died. And when he died, all of a sudden the demons left. And the people were sitting there going, hey, wait a minute. Did we just kill the guy who was anointed the king by the Romans? Yeah. Did we just kill the guy that was healing us and lifting people out of the grave and saving people's kids and that kind of thing? Yeah. Right. There was chagrin. And, everybody on the left who was so quick to kill anybody who speaks out against what I'm talking about, needs to be denied medical service.
Yes.
Don't even let them into the hospital, right? No ambulance should pick them up. Some commentators were saying anybody who denies it needs to die, needs to be put in prison.
Their kids taken away.
Burned. I mean, this is the kind of rhetoric that was going around in the States, hard and heavy.
Oh, yeah.
By celebrities out of New York in particular.
Oh, yeah.
Then, now we got the situation we're in right now. The kind of rhetoric I'm hearing. Why didn't you warn us?
I also hear that, you guys got lucky. You just guessed. Yeah, we just guessed everything correctly. You're right. I need to go buy a lottery ticket. I just guessed. Of course, yeah, it's funny. The people they're trying to control the narrative. They're trying to sort of rewrite history right from under your noses. And that,
it's like you guessed as to the science. Well, look, the science may have been questionable, but the guy who walked into the room holding it had horns sticking out of his head, was covered in red leather with a tail, and smelled like sulfur.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was guessing at the science.
It was an easy tell for the eyes to see and ears to hear. It's so funny. Like you read that just that phrase alone has so much depth to it. But that's actually that's true. You if you were in the spirit during those times, it was a very easy tell. It was not difficult to understand what was sort of happening. It was
a very easy tell. It was you could see it immediately. You could see it.
Yeah.
And, all the, everything that was associated with it was just, was a giveaway. But, then now we're accused for not having warned enough people, right? Or being rude to people. Well, I'm not trying to be rude to anybody. I'm just trying to say that when you get all hyped up about how right you are and how, in your pontification and self-righteousness, that you kill off the intelligentsia, then the intelligentsia leaves. And the next thing you know, all you have left is a bunch of people who know how to dunk witches in a bucket in the river. The guy who built the bucket's gone.
And you referenced Fort Maccabees. That's why I really like that book, because it deals with reason throughout the whole thing, right? And it deals with the depth of reason, and it deals with the morality of reason. And I'm not a big fan of them. I'm not a fan of the Book of the Maccabees, but they're not my favorite parts of Scripture. But that fourth one specifically, I really appreciate for that reason, where it takes almost the like modern philosophical concepts that they unmarry, they divorce from Yah, and brings it back together. And I think it's a very important read for that purpose, that it allows us to look at things like the Salem witch trials and the modern version of the Salem witch trials, whether that's like cancel culture or whatever, however society manifests it these days, and have a basis of reason, right? You can go through the fourth book of Maccabees and sort of kind of reestablish, okay, I'm going to take my spirit-filled self and try to, not that we don't have reason, but try to bring in common sense and reason as an equal part, not an equal part to the spirit, but as an equal deciding factor to my behavior in the modern world.
Yeah. I think that's true. But again, I don't want to just leave it with reason too, Drew, because the Ruach HaKodesh is an important part of this.
Mm-hmm. You have to
and in this particular ministry, we who spend a lot of time dealing with Scripture, sometimes we forget the Ruach. And we should never forget the Ruach, because the Ruach blesses us with strength and endurance and guidance and motivation and boldness and otherwise an inherent ability to be able to understand, the ability to have wisdom, the ability to have knowledge, to give counsel, but to be strong in the face of temptation. This comes from the Ruach HaKodesh, right? And we should never be unthankful for the giving of the Ruach, nor should we ever stop pursuing the Ruach in terms of our own life. When we try to embrace things, we think, I can do this, not by strength, not by might, but by my Ruach, says Yahweh. Right?
Well, that's one of the ultimate gifts of the Messiah's life here, right? And he says, the Ruach won't come until I leave. And it was part of his mystery that he had to leave in order for the Ruach to come to all of us. And so that is a gift from him that, we didn't earn, obviously. And I love that point that you don't want to take any of the gifts from Yah for granted, but specifically when Scripture outlines that the Messiah had to leave to give us this one. And that was, there's a couple of reasons he had to leave, of course, but one of them, in his own words, was so that the Comforter would come, that the Ruach would come upon us, and that we would all have this within us.
The Comforter, and that's the word used, and that's a big deal when you're talking about the kind of suffering that can come into the life of believers, and suffering can't come.
Gentlemen,
cheers,
sorry.
Let's thank you very much.
John. Thank you, John. Thank you for today.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Bye.
I got to go myself, so we should kind of wrap her up. Anyway.
I know. This has been so detailed. I'm going to have to rewatch this again. This is nearly 3 hours. So let's just dismiss everybody. Thank you. John brings such great detail, and then you add to it. It goes on and
it's so hard. I'm looking for a Sukkot for this. Sitting around a campfire, and also it's 3 a.m. I love those nights.
Listen, let's dismiss everybody because it's late over here. It's been nearly 3 hours. Thank you so much. This has been fascinating. And if you read some of the comments, it's like the thread is, I have to watch this at least 4 times over. And I'm sitting here just trying to absorb it all in myself. So thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much. We will see you. Let me release you. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Drew, for coming back in after your work today and helping here. Fantastic. Thank you so much. We're all so appreciative. I'm just like with the viewers today, very, very absorbent of everything that has been presented here today. And it's great to be able to bring this to you. So I want to release you all and say you're blessed and take care. We will see you next Tuesday. Drew will be hosting. I'll be in Portugal. And we'll try and make it shorter. All right. Take care. Bye-bye, guys. See you. Shalom.
Two people laughed. Two people cried. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
blind man cross the road, trying to make the other side, baby. Ever seen a young girl growing old, trying to make herself a bride? So what becomes of you, my love?
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Pray that he's still out there. Somewhere.